We're done with our dream eco home. Thanks to our helpful neighbor. Now, we can finally start on that 50,000-piece jigsaw puzzle.
Sorry to interrupt. Eco home jigsaw puzzles.
Possible?
Can. Singlife has a plan for you. But I can't promise Phau.
Whatever your dream, Singlife is here to help you achieve it with financial freedom.
Better way.
When you look after your people, they will look after the customers and the business will take care of each other. So every time we are faced with a challenge, we choose purpose because we want to serve the communities within which we operate.
At GreenPack, partnership is very important to us. We like to do business with like-minded companies who has a mission of contributing to the future of sustainability.
I feel it deep in my bones. Weightless and airborne, skyline vision, all we know is riding where the dreams are.
Hello and welcome to the CNA Summit 2025 Trade-offs in Leadership. I'm Elizabeth Neo and I present the business news on CNA's flagship morning program, Asia First. It's really good to have you join us this Thursday afternoon on our YouTube and LinkedIn live stream. We are, of course, broadcasting this from the Pan Pacific, Singapore. Now, being a business leader involves strategic decision-making, and one of the most challenging parts of this is navigating the trade-offs that come with it. And that is the focus of this year's CNA Summit, which will look at the tough choices that leaders face within the organization that impact talent management, resource allocation, leadership style and culture, to the considerations leaders must make beyond the organization's boundaries that affect stakeholder expectations, market adaptation, partnerships and collaborations, even regulatory compliance as well as brand reputation. And so we've got notable policymakers and business leaders joining us today, including Mr. Desmond Lee. He is Minister for National Development as well as Minister in charge of Social Services Integration. Now, on our YouTube and LinkedIn live stream, we will bring you snippets of CNA's documentary, Leadership Unlimited. Leadership is not just about giving orders. It's also about trust, influence, and connection. Now, this clip explores how balancing competence with likability shapes better outcomes. Here's a look.
So in psychology, we have a theory called how we perceive people. There are two dimensions. One is called likability or agreeableness. The other one is called competence. Most students typically focus on demonstrating competence. That's why when they go to a negotiation, when they go to a meeting, a boardroom meeting, they try to exhibit that competence. They will talk a lot more. What's interesting is that research shows us that competence is very, very important. But likability comes first. If people don't like you, competence doesn't really matter. One of the best tools to build likability and build trust is by listening. Many students, they listen with the intent to respond to an argument. I want my students to listen with the intent to understand the argument first and then respond later. Your goal right now is to negotiate a limited product, in this case, flowers. I think it starts with self-awareness that as a leader, you're going to tell yourself that you're listening, not because you want to respond, but to understand what your followers truly wanted or what your counterpart in the negotiation table really wanted.
Like 50 is like below like my minimum threshold, which I would need. So like
to stick to 100,000 bid. 90 is too much. It's only 100 flowers.
Anytime in negotiation, in leadership, we always think about our own interests 100% of the time. Now that's fine. What I'm finding in my work is that if you care about the other person's interest, in most of the time, you can actually better your own self-interest as well because you enlarge the pie, enlarge your value in front of both of us.
Now, in the insurance sector, trust and value go hand in hand. And joining us to share her insights is Helen Shen, Group Head of Products at at Singlife. Helen, it's really lovely to have you on CNA Summit, of course. I just want to talk to you about, your role as head of products at Singlife. As an insurance business, that balances profits with providing affordable policies for customers, is it possible to do both?
Oh yeah, it's definitely a balancing act, and that's why we are here, and that's why there's an insurance industry. There's always, today the theme is really about trade-offs, and while it seems like these two, are at opposing ends, right? Profitability, customers, and making sure they have affordable policies. At the end of the day, if I think long-term, if I think for the future, they don't really feel at odds to me so much, right? We are looking at what is insurance for our customers. It's about protecting them. It's about protecting them for the long term and making sure that we are there on a sustainable basis and to make sure that we are there right when we need them. So the ability to do this actually rests in the affordability of the premiums and to make sure that we're looking at this from a long-term perspective. But from a short-term perspective, we're also balancing this. We're balancing this from a portfolio aspect. So for example, you'll be surprised to know that last year we launched a hospitalization plan for young adults, and the cash outlay is only $1 a year. You will say, that doesn't sound like a very profitable plan at all. But clearly, we are building some of these products to protect the young adults, to fix the protection gap in Singapore, and making sure that we are there when the customers need us the most, which is in that long term, in that sustainable future.
Yeah, it sure sounds like you've managed to balance the two demands pretty well. I want to talk to you about social policy agendas. Customers, consumers these days, they really expect something from corporations as well. And so do you find consumers are increasingly turning to corporations to pursue social policy agendas? And how is Singlife balancing its social duties as well as the business?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We see that consumers today are a lot more open and a lot more have high expectations for corporations in terms of social responsibility. I'm a consumer myself too. We all do that. And at Singlife, we take that responsibility very seriously. So to us, there is a community angle. Last year and the year before, we've launched Singlife Care Collab. So that's a curator of brands and partners that we've put together and really taking care of our customers' needs, taking care of many of the societies that are not top of mind, like for example, caregivers, right? We've also launched the Singlife Dementia Cover. It's the first in the market, something that the society really needs as we go into an aging population. So there's quite a lot that we've done really on the product space, on the innovation space, on the proposition space to make sure that we are protecting our customers and the society as a whole. But at the same time, we also think about our staff, our stakeholders, many of the partners, the public. So there's quite a lot that we are also doing beyond the products, right? It's not just the products, it's about the population as a whole. So as you might have seen, Singlife has partnered with many organizations, the community, we're championing agility, championing empathy, sort of really going out and beyond that. So the bottom line is this, Liz. When you say trade-off, the operative word that comes to mind for me is actually balance, right? Is it trade-off? Is it balance? To me, the operative word is really, really about balance. And to me, balance means taking a long-term view and balancing profitability, balancing affordability, balancing what the society needs, what customer needs. But at the end of the day, keeping the consumer needs and our customer right at the heart of what we do.
All right, so it's all about perspective, isn't it? It's balance versus trade-off. Thank you so much, Helen. Really appreciate your time and for sharing your insights and what Singlife is doing. Helen Shender, she is Group Head of Products at Singlife. Now, before we head on to the next interview, I want to show you what's ahead at CNA Summit 2025.
The CNA Summit 2025, Trade-offs in Leadership. Presenting partner, Singlife, a better way to financial freedom. The summit explores how leaders balance priorities, make tough decisions, and navigate complexity in an era of rapid change and uncertainty. Join the conversation as we bring together distinguished leaders from the public and private sector as they delve into critical internal trade-offs, including talent management, resource allocation, organizational design, and leadership style. while examining the strategic external trade-offs leaders must make to achieve stakeholder expectations, market adaptation, partnerships and brand reputation. The CNA Summit 2025 on the 20th February. Brought to you by MediaCorp. Impact Partner, NVPC. Main Partner, OPPO, Find N5.
Now, one of the key challenges for leaders today is balancing sustainability with business priorities. And up next, we will hear from Dr. Vicky Bandu, President of UN Global Compact Network Singapore, on how companies can navigate these trade-offs. So, Dr. Bandu, it's really good to have you on again. And I just want to talk to you. As a leading voice on corporate sustainability, what are some of the trade-offs unique to the work that you do?
So we're a part of the UNGC, and the setup here is really about aligning to the 10 principles. There's 20,000 organizations and corporations that have come together, spanning across 170 countries, and our focus specifically in Singapore is to align against the 10 principles. The 10 principles that globally UNGC is aligned to is human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. But specifically, when we look at those 10 principles, it's very fitting to some of the activities that we do here, because we want to bring alignment between business strategies and the Sustainable Development Goals. And that alignment sometimes is seen as a trade-off. But really, it is about understanding how the strategies can implement and help businesses to grow whilst also delivering the Sustainable Development Goals. And we've got about 250 representative companies from MNCs and SMEs that are part of our corporate network.
Yeah, and so what kind of trade-offs do you face when advocating for stricter sustainability policies, which, of course, are more important now than ever for corporates, and that may affect, say, their profits, but of course have a wider economic impact as well. Is there a way to kind of minimize the negative effects of these so-called trade-offs?
And many organizations start to look at sustainability, but then also look at it as the impact on the profit. And actually, I think that's the wrong thing to do. When we look at the trade-offs between sustainability and profitability, there is actually profitable sustainability. That's the agenda that we want to try and achieve. And when you look at organizations, and you can easily look at the cost of sustainability. And when you look at the cost of sustainability, it's about actually what do I need to invest today to be able to achieve my SDGs alignment, for example. And actually, that's the wrong question to be looking at. It's actually the cost of non-sustainability. So I'll give you an example. If I'm a small business and my agenda is all about generating profit for the next weeks and months to come, that's okay. I'll be able to generate my profit, and I'll probably have little bandwidth for sustainability. But if my agenda is about generating profit in the near term and looking at the long term to be able to be competitively advantaged in the 3 to 5 years to come, I need to start looking at what are the investments I need to make in sustainability today to be able to have that competitive advantage in the 3 to 5 years' time. So what do I need to be future-proof for my business? So that priority and trade-off, especially for SMEs, become really significant. And these are some of the things that we encourage SMEs to think about, by not just the awareness in what's happening in the global agenda, but the tools that they might be able to use, the frameworks that they might be able to adopt, and some of the practices and learnings that other organizations are doing that might be relevant for them as well.
For SMEs, they definitely face challenges, investing in this sort of ESG sort of policies and initiatives, right? Funding is one area that is always, it's hard to talk about as well. And so how do you convince companies to integrate or incorporate ESG principles into their business strategies and convince them to sometimes prioritize this over profits? Especially in the short term where you will feel the pain for sure, but then it's all about what happens in the long term, right?
Yes. You're right. It is absolutely about planning for the future. We've got regulatory changes that are happening globally that is going to start to impact the cost of doing business when we're trading in Singapore or out of Singapore. And I'll give you an example. In Europe, there's a carbon tax. So any goods that are imported into Europe, there's a carbon adjustment mechanism that really translates into carbon pricing. that then gets translated into your business accounts. And actually, this is a headwind that's coming very, very, very strongly. And if we're not prepared for it, we can no longer be able to trade with that sort of entity. So this is where we need to take a step back and understand the regulatory environment. I totally appreciate that SMEs are resource constraints. They haven't got the bandwidth, they haven't got the finance, they haven't got access to technology. But this is where the partnerships, this is where the cohesion, this is where trade associations and the chambers in Singapore are so well set up to give the SMEs the leg up. We've just recently announced our Singapore budget. There's a big, significant draw to support SMEs, and particularly with their sustainability agenda, using carbon bonds, using investments in technologies, making the processes more energy efficient. So we've got to be able to join the dots for ourselves to be much more future ready.
So that's your experience when you're talking about SMEs. What about the large corporations that you work with as well? How does UNGC Singapore balance the engagement with large corporations, which they obviously have more resources? Funding is not really such a big issue when it comes to devoting those resources to sustainability. And so, what is the difference here? And is there anything that, as a small SME, any lessons that we can learn from bigger corporations, even though they may not have, of course, the funding and resources? But
I think when we look at SMEs, when we look at MNCs, you're absolutely right. There's a plan. There's a strategy that hopefully embeds sustainability as part of the agenda. But the intersection of challenges that MNCs face is when you execute the plan into operations. Is that sustainability agenda being carried off from the long-term plan to what we're doing on our day-to-day activities and how we're reporting on a yearly basis? Which is why having that accountability, having that sort of audit yourselves. When you look at board representation, about 2/3 of the board agenda in MNCs focuses on financials, on audit, on risk, on compliance, on operations. Sustainability tends to have a less of a priority, whereas actually the same conversation and the same sort of hypothesis which can impact SMEs in the long run can also impact the MNCs. So we want to encourage more accountability from MNCs. We want to encourage more transparency in terms of the data and the reporting that they're doing and the goodness that they're doing in sustainability. This is not about penalizing organizations. It's actually about celebrating success. And that's where entities like the UNGCNS and various other trade associations and chambers come together to share some of the success stories with others so that we can take that goodness not just to other organizations but through the whole ecosystem of Singapore, including SMEs.
Now, you can't talk about ESG without talking about greenwashing. And so how do you ensure that companies that join the UNGC Singapore are there to make a genuine impact and not just for branding purposes, right?
Genuine impact is so important. It is, you've got to take that accountability and we've got to have that transparency. Actually being able to measure what you're doing, monitor what you're doing, and then on a regular basis report what you're doing. And that transparency of the reporting allows organizations to see the progress that they're making in some of the areas and what more we need to do to be able to support the organizations that might be sort of falling a little bit short to the commitments that they might have set. So this is why I think it's really important that we look at MNCs and we look at the transparencies and look at the commitments that they're making and encourage and continue that sort of approach that many have already adopted.
I also want to talk about, so you're in charge of the Singapore unit of the UNGC, and I want to know how you balance this with the international landscape, the goals faced by international on an international scale, which if we look at Singapore alone, we face unique challenges. But how are you willing to align this with international goals?
And I think we all appreciate that even over the last few months, the landscape has changed quite significantly. There are significant geopolitical shifts that's bringing together the agenda once again and questioning the agenda in some sense of sustainability. We've got to look at those headwinds, but at the same time, we've also got to look at the opportunities that this faces. Southeast Asia is still one of the most growing regions in the world. We've got an opportunity, a fantastic opportunity to step up into this space and carry on some of the goodness that we've already started within the region. We've just shared our recent announcements, and the government shared the recent announcements on the greenhouse gas emissions, dropping that from the 60 million tons to 45 to 50 million tons by 2030 is great advancements.
Yeah.
We see loads of organizations, not just in Singapore, but in Japan, Korea, Australia, where the leadership of those multinational companies are taking great advancements in the sustainability agenda. We're seeing green financing coming in ASEAN, India, and China. We're seeing Japan committing to net zero by 2050.
Yeah.
So we see this region as actually a vibrant, and I would say a great position and a great opportunity to embrace as a leader in the sustainability agenda.
Dr. Bang, we really appreciate you sharing this with us, and thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a good session here at the CNA Summit. That was Dr. Vicky Bang there. He's president of the UN Global Compact Network Singapore. Now, in a few moments, we will be taking you into our ballroom where we will be kicking off the summit. Of course, this would not have been possible without our partners, and I just want to take a moment to thank them. Our presenting partner is Singlife. Our impact partner is the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center, or NPVC. And our main partner is OPPO. Once again, a big thank you to our partners for making today's summit possible. Now, I want to shift our focus to leadership in the investment sector, where navigating trade-offs and driving innovation are key. And joining us next is Nicole Schmidt. She is Managing Director for Asia Pacific at Bridgewater Associates. Nicole, of course, will be sharing insights on leadership challenges, communication strategies, and so much more. Nicole, thank you so much for making the time, and appreciate you sharing with us, what you're going to be sharing in the next couple of minutes. So I'm going to start off about the unique challenges that you see and the trade-offs that you see in the investment sector. And based on your experience, what have you navigated? How have you overcome them?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's very exciting to be here. Look, everything comes down to having alignment at the top of your organization on what your goals are and what you're trying to do. At Bridgewater, we have been deeply researching in markets and economies for 50 years, and that is core to what we want to do. And ultimately, our goal is to take that understanding that we've developed and create really great solutions for our clients and partner with them on their biggest investment challenges. And if you think through, okay, how do I as a leader then navigate making trade-offs and different challenges, everything has to anchor back to what that goal is as an organization. And so there's a couple of things. I think from a business perspective, the things that we're constantly trying to balance are, how do you think about balancing short-term performance and long-term sustainability? How do you ensure that as an investment organization, you're fostering creativity and innovation, but balancing that with discipline? And those are hard things to balance and trade off. And I think the key to doing that successfully is making sure that you do that with the long-term vision in sight. You want to have long-term sustainability. You want to make sure that you're anchored to the goal of delivering for your clients. And we do that by managing our organization, I would say, very conservatively, so that you can be nimble in terms of managing different environments and managing your organization through those things. And then there's people. I think people is a very critical and important part of that strategy. And there's challenges there too. It's really hard to be an investor. You want to have top investment talent. You need to hold a really high bar for the people at your organization and balance that with also giving them the space to really develop and learn while making sure that you're holding a high bar. And so those are trade-offs that you're constantly trying to navigate. But I think, just tying it back to what's our goal is really what we anchor all of our decisions in.
And indeed, because you are senior leader in Bridgewater, Singapore, and the Singapore office. And so how do you communicate these trade-offs up and down the line, right?
Yeah. Look, it all comes down to transparency. If you think about Bridgewater, you think about transparency. And transparency is critical. That's both whether you're managing with your stakeholders, whether you're managing things with your team, and when you're communicating with clients. Transparency is ultimately the thing that is going to create trust. And so as a leader, it's important and incumbent on you to make sure that you're being transparent with that thought process. And if you tie it back to, okay, if I'm communicating and being transparent, that everything I'm doing and the decisions I'm making and the trade-offs all tie back to what our goal is as an investment manager, as an institution, I think it really helps bring people along in that journey and help them to follow you on that mission. And so transparency is key.
I noticed another word that you used quite a few times in your first response, and that is the word balance.
Yeah.
And so I want to ask you if it's possible to have your cake and eat it too.
If you can figure that out, please let me know.
I thought you would have the answer to that.
I think it's hard. I don't think there's have your cake and eat it too. I think, you're always going to have to make trade-offs. And the things in my career that I have felt are most helpful and most valuable is, one, stick to your values. Integrity is all you have. Don't make trade-offs on those things, and I think that's the most important things. And so if you stay true to what your organization's values are, what you're focused on, that's the most important thing. Don't make trade-offs there, and at the end you're going to have to make trade-offs everywhere else. And that's just, I think that's part of being a leader, is being able to wisely navigate how you do those things. But again, if you can figure it out, please let me know. I'd love to know how you can have it all.
Before me, let me know. I want to look at outlook. Right. We're in a challenging landscape economically, politically, in geopolitics and all that. And so what kind of trade-offs, what kind of challenges will Bridgewater have to navigate up ahead? And in general, what should investment companies be prepared for?
Yeah. So there's a couple things. Look, exactly what you said. We are in a very unique and very rapidly evolving investment landscape where you're going to have a period of macro volatility. Things geopolitically are changing very quickly, and the investment landscape is changing very quickly. So one of the things that has been core for us is I think it's critically important to have a process, especially as an investment manager, that is set up to uniquely and flexibly be able to navigate this environment. We have a very robust systematic process that we have built up over 50 years that has gone through various cycles and helped us navigate that very well. And so I think first and foremost is making sure that you have a process that can consume and take in. I mean, there's so much data coming at us. The world is changing very rapidly. So being able to nimbly, flexibly, and very quickly navigate that so you can see, 2 and 3 steps down the line and be able to make investment decisions is critically important. And then I'd say there's 2 main things that we are critically focused on. One is AI. I know you hear it every day, probably everywhere, but it is transforming at a rapid pace, and it's influencing markets, it's influencing economies, it's going to influence the way that we work, that people work. And so at Bridgewater, we've basically been focused on it from 2 perspectives. One, as a global investor, it's critically important to understand the impact that AI is going to have on markets and economies. If you're going to trade markets, you need to know what that means for markets. And the second thing is then how we can actually use AI to generate alpha in markets and have an investment strategy that's machine learning focused. And so those are the 2 things that we've been focused on. Going back to 2012, our co-CIO, Greg Jensen, has been critically focused on this. I think we're at the forefront of it, and I think as an investment institution, you need to be focused on this because we are at a critical inflection point when it comes to AI. And then in all the conversations we're having with our investors, look, we talked about a period of macro volatility. I think the investing landscape is going to be challenging in the years ahead. So how do we work with our clients who are thinking about how can I have a more resilient portfolio through this period? And how do we, Bridgewater, bring the best of our understanding, the best of our investment expertise to our clients more flexibly to give them better solutions that are going to help them navigate this period ahead and really have a more resilient portfolio?
So it's uncertain. but it can be exciting. It's what you make of it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Nicole, really appreciate your time and your insights
Great.
this afternoon. Thanks for joining us at CNA Summit.
Thank you for
Nicole
having me.
Schmidt there. She is Managing Director for Asia Pacific at Bridgewater Associates. Of course, she has been sharing about the challenges on leadership, communication strategies, as well as the evolving landscape of investment.
We're done with our dream eco home. Thanks to our helpful neighbor. Now we can finally start on that 50,000-piece jigsaw puzzle.
Sorry to interrupt. Eco home, jigsaw puzzles.
Possible?
Can. Singlife has a plan for you. But I can't promise Phau.
Whatever your dream, Singlife is here to help you achieve it with financial freedom.
Better way.
When you look after your people, they will look after the customers and the business will take care of each other. So every time we are faced with a challenge, we choose purpose because we want to serve the communities within which we operate.
At GreenPack, partnership is very important to us. We like to do business with like-minded companies who has a mission of contributing to the future of sustainability.
I feel it deep in my bones. Weightless and airborne. Skyline fades and all we know is riding where the dreams are.
Well, if you're just joining us, a very warm welcome to you. You're watching the CNA Summit Trade-offs in Leadership. And of course, we're coming to you live from the Pan Pacific, Singapore. I'm your host, Elizabeth Neo. We're about to kick things off with an address by MediaCorp CEO, Ms. Tham Lok Keng, followed by a keynote address by Mr. Desmond Lee. He is Minister for National Development and Minister in charge of Social Services Integration that is taking place in the ballroom just beside me. Of course, there's plenty going on today right here on top of the opening address by Ms. Tham Lok Keng, which is our MediaCorp CEO, as well as Minister Desmond Lee, who is Minister for National Development and Minister in charge of Social Services Integration. We will be having a panel discussion as well. The first panel discussion set to take place very shortly after the two addresses will be on internal trade-offs. And so this panel explores really, the tough choices that leaders face on internal dynamics within the organization that impact internal stakeholders, processes and resources such as talent management, resource allocation, organizational design, leadership style, cultural transformation as well. And that's going to be moderated by my colleague Andrea Heng. She's a presenter at CNA 938. And the panelists on that session include top executives from Citi that we're going to be speaking with Mr. Tibor Pandi. He is the Singapore Country Officer and Banking Head at Citi. We've got Mr. Kok Ping Soon, Chief Executive Officer at Singapore Business Federation, as well as Ms. Pearlyn Phau. She is a Group Chief Executive Officer at Singlife. So plenty going on. And we will be taking you into our ballroom right now.
Is here to help you achieve it.
When you look after your people, they will look after the customers and the business will take care of each other. So every time we are faced with a challenge, we choose purpose. And we want to serve the communities within which we operate.
At GreenPack, partnership is very important. We like to do business with like-minded companies who has a mission of contributing to the future of sustainability.
Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, a warm welcome. Great to see so many of you here. Mr. Desmond Lee, Minister for National Development, Minister in charge of Social Services Integration, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to the CNA Summit 2025 on trade-offs in leadership. Thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon. Just very quickly, a shout out to our sponsors who are supporting this summit, presenting partner Singlife, impact partner National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre, NVPC, and main partner OPPO. My name is Stephen Chia. I'm a CNA presenter. I host a show called Talking Point. How many of you have watched Talking Point? All put up your hands. Make me feel good. Thank you. Oh, that's nice to hear. As you know, it's a show that delves into a lot of interesting things. We try and break down the issues that we feel matter and impact people who are living here in Singapore. And on top of that, I also host a podcast called Deep Dive, where we also look at the issues that are affecting us here in Singapore. So I'm very happy to be helping out today at this event. We want to welcome you, and of course, I've already told you a reminder to keep your phones on silent mode. And later on, during our panel discussions, there will be a chance for questions. So you've seen the QR code on your table. Feel free to log it in and send us some questions. Now let's get to today's topic. I'm going to phrase it a bit differently. To eat or not to eat? Okay, you've all eaten. That's why we invited you after lunch. But come lunchtime, that decision is easy. You want to eat, but you kind of think to yourself, should I go and have my favorite Hokkien mee or nasi goreng in a hawker center, sweat it out? Or I can go eat a burger, not so exciting, but be in cool air conditioning comfort. So there is a trade-off, right? You're thinking one for the other, taste versus comfort. Now, we're living in a time of unprecedented change and uncertainty, and many of us are faced with making a lot of complex decisions on a daily basis. The stakes are really high, and the margin for error is very small. People are unforgiving. Success is no longer defined solely by internal efficiency or profitability. It hinges on how well leaders navigate all these external and internal circumstances. Managing, stakeholder expectations, balancing competing priorities. There's so many things you have to look at. So what are the trade-offs? How can you better negotiate that fine balance? And how do you unite people to support all these decisions that you're making? Our keynote speaker and the two panels that follow will discuss these issues, the internal and external corporate trade-offs. And we will also explore the critical factors that distinguish resilient and successful organizations from those that struggle to adapt. So once again, I encourage you to be part of this discussion. We look forward to having questions that we can pose to our panel. So do take part in that pigeonhole conversation. But to kick things off, let me first invite MediaCorp's Chief Executive Officer, Ms. Tham Lok Keng, to come forward and say a few words. Lok Keng, please.
Good afternoon, guest of honor, Minister for National Development Desmond Lee, distinguished guests, friends and colleagues. A very, very warm welcome to the CNA Summit. It is my pleasure to see so many of you here in person. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. And also a very equally warm welcome to our viewers from across Asia who are tuning in to CNA's live streams on YouTube and LinkedIn. The CNA Summit is our flagship thought leadership, which brings together political leaders, captains of industry, the diplomatic corps, academics, newsmakers, to really analyze and engage on topical issues. Last year, we discussed how trust matters. Building on that, in today's summit, we will discuss trade-offs in leadership and take a deep dive into the strategic thinking and the decision-making process that leaders must master to manage often competing priorities. This is evidence in governance, of course, but I will respectfully leave that for Minister Desmond Lee to discuss the trade-offs in policy and governance and confine my remarks to the business sphere. No matter what business it is that we operate in, the landscape we face today has come to be defined by that very popular acronym VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. This creates a leadership environment where trade-offs are unavoidable. Do we move quickly, or do we take time to analyze data and mitigate risks? Should we have central control, or should we empower our teams and allow inconsistencies? How do we balance that need for operational stability and fostering innovation? How do we achieve high growth, but at the same time think about long-term sustainability? I'm sure that these are the trade-offs and the thoughts that all of us have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And the list is endless. And the list of skills that leaders have to bring to the table to also meet these trade-offs are also endless. We are expected to have adaptive thinking, that ability to make decisions in ambiguity. We have to have emotional intelligence to navigate the tensions between teams and stakeholders, and also the skill to communicate strategically and yet authentically. Sometimes being able to master all of this at the same time really feels like a Herculean challenge, at least to me. But I suppose, I would like to also share with everyone examples of the many trade-offs that we deal with in MediaCorp. It is, clear that in the past decade, the audience landscape has become increasingly fragmented. Like many other businesses, we want to establish that direct relationship with our consumers. We want that deep engagement, which can happen in what we call our owned and operated, or O&O platforms, such as our own apps. But at the same time, we also want to grow our base of consumers beyond our platforms and reaching audiences in other platforms, which in our case, are usually global social media platforms. And these third-party platforms are accretive to our reach, but we have to consider whether they would impact that deep relationship that we have with our consumers in our own environments. Sometimes it is possible to have your cake and eat it. Since 2018, we made that tough decision to put all of CNA's video content available on the YouTube platform and not just our own platforms. We have since enjoyed a significant increase in our reach, not just locally and regionally, but also to a global audience. So much so that we have now been able to launch specific streaming services in the US and the UK for CNA. Beyond YouTube, we also recognize the growing importance of social platforms like TikTok. They enabled us to engage new, digitally connected audiences in short form and shareable content. The rise of social media has also resulted in fundamental changes in our strategy. Previously, we would think about social platforms purely to promote our content and to drive traffic back to our own O&O platforms. But habits evolve. Audiences now expect to complete that experience and complete their consumption on such social media platforms. And we have to serve our audiences where they are. And yet, at the same time, we have to invest in deepening that engagement and lengthening the time that they spend with us through innovative new formats as well as storytelling techniques. So, for example, MediaCorp has recently broken new ground in the new microdrama space. If you're not clear what that is, they're 1-2 minute per episode dramas with productions such as Falling for the CEO's Son, not mine, and our Sunny Side Up spin-off, Break the Silence, both of which very quickly accumulated 6 million views each. It's not just microdramas that are gaining traction on social media, of course. CNA has found a new audience on TikTok, and to date, we have reached 1 million followers for CNA with an audience reach of 332 million, and that's 366% growth from a year ago. That said, obviously, there is that constant push and pull for us. How much do we invest where? How do we balance the needs of our own platforms while wanting to be present everywhere that our audiences are? But all the while, we still have to maintain trust and maintain the high quality of content that aligns with our mission as Singapore's national media network. So, what is the trade-off? We have finite resources, as everyone else in the room does. And we have to think about how to channel these resources into all the contending needs that we have. And stretching all of us to meet the needs in this kind of ever-changing, really fast-paced environment really weighs heavily on our staff. Operating in a high-speed, high-performance environment can only be viable, therefore, when we have people-focused safeguards in place. We need to invest consciously to support our teams, both physically as well as mentally. To me, this is not a trade-off. It is the critical cornerstone that is necessary if we are going to be operating successfully in a VUCA environment. In closing, please allow me to thank our panelists for being with us today. I look forward to your insights. And I would also like to thank our partners for your unwavering support in bringing today's event to fruition. Thank you very much. I'll speak to all of you later.
Thank you, Loking, for sharing that. I think it's true. There is always a trade-off in everything we do every day. And, to stay relevant, to stay agile, to stay connected with our audiences, for us, that is the challenge. And it's not an easy task. Now, I would like to invite our guest of honor, Minister Desmond Lee, to come forward and give his keynote address. Minister, please.
Ms. Tham Lok Keng, CEO Media Corp, friends from the Diplomatic Corps, leaders from industry, community, and the media, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm delighted to be able to join you here at the CNA Summit, which explores how leaders across different sectors manage tensions and trade-offs to achieve strategic outcomes. Actually, when you look at Singapore, you see tight constraints. We are a very small island city-state, no natural resources, no hinterland, vulnerable to the external environment. As a principle, we strive to do more and to do better for Singaporeans, and to avoid making stark binary trade-offs wherever possible. But inevitably, when constraints become more binding, we will have to manage tensions and make difficult trade-offs between competing objectives. For instance, given limited resources, do we meet today's pressing needs? Or do we save more for tomorrow's generation? Do we conserve or do we develop? How do we manage diverse and sometimes conflicting aspirations of different groups of Singaporeans? Now, despite these tight constraints, we've built a thriving global hub and vibrant city over 6 decades. We are home to a world-class seaport and air hub, a leading financial center, and with a home ownership rate of close to 90% in a city in nature. We've built a thriving global hub and vibrant city and are celebrating 60 years of nation building, or SG60, this year. But certainly in the years ahead, we will face even greater headwinds and challenges. The economic and geopolitical outlook is uncertain. Our population is aging. Technology-driven disruptions will be even more rapid. And we have to grapple with existential threats like climate change and rising sea levels. Like our pioneers, we strive to turn our challenges into opportunities. Prime Minister Lawrence Wong announced the SG60 budget 2 days ago, addressing current concerns, but also taking the long view to prepare Singapore and invest heavily in Singaporeans, so that we can seize future opportunities amidst turbulence and uncertainty. Today, I will describe how we manage some of the tensions and trade-offs that we face in urban planning, namely 5 of our land optimization strategies, our 4 core approaches that guide them, and the 3 enablers that make them possible. I will then illustrate these in 2 foundational areas, as well as our singular goal in urban planning, for Singapore as a city to remain livable, sustainable, and exceptional. One of the most obvious constraints for us is land. There are many pressing demands for land. At the same time, while we are a city, we also have to fit everything that a sovereign country needs within our city limits. This creates tremendous pressures. But over the decades, we've developed strategies to overcome some of these constraints, turn a challenge into an opportunity. First, as good stewards of land and resources, we optimize through intensification, build upwards and make use of vertical spaces. We also build mixed-use developments that integrate residential, commercial, and recreational spaces to reap benefits between synergistic users and to make our spaces more vibrant. One example would be Guokko Tower, a mixed-use development in Singapore's city centre, an ambitious 38-storey vertical city that comprises commercial, residential, retail, hotel, and green elements. Another example, our Tampines Hub, Singapore's largest integrated community and lifestyle hub. We have integrated a stadium and sports facilities, retail, a hawker centre, and a slew of other amenities in one single building. If we had to conventionally allocate individual land parcels for each of these users, the amount of land and resources consumed would have been much more. So that's first, optimize, intensify. Second, we try to unlock new spaces. One way is through reclamation. For example, more than 40 years ago, our pioneers decided to reclaim land to give us options to expand our city centre. This has allowed us to create a new business and financial hub, which you know as Marina Bay and Marina South. Another way is to go underground. For example, the Jurong Rock Caverns, Southeast Asia's first underground hydrocarbon storage cavern, is 150 meters below the ground level. This has freed up 60 hectares of surface land for other users. Third, we recycle our land and carry out strategic redevelopment. Brownfield sites can be repurposed for new developments, allowing us to reallocate spaces to meet both current and future needs. One major example would be Paya Lebar Air Base, which we will relocate to Changi from the 2030s onwards. This move will give us the opportunity to comprehensively redevelop the 800-hectare site and its surrounding industrial estates into a highly livable and sustainable new town. Fourth, we try to innovate to maximize our usage of space. Take the East Coast Integrated Depot set to open in 2026. This will be the first of its kind in the world. It combines a multi-story train depot as well as a bus depot. This will save us 44 hectares worth of land or 60 football fields and save 40% in construction cost. Fifth, we need to constantly think about and develop big strategic moves today for the prosperity of tomorrow. We must be prepared to reimagine our urban spaces, to create space and bandwidth for us to do even more. Take the Greater Southern Waterfront. It will be a major gateway for urban living along Singapore's southern coast. To free up large tracts of prime waterfront land, we are moving existing ports in Tanjung Pagar and Pasir Panjang westwards to the Tuas Megaport. This also allows port operations to be more efficient. When completed in the 2040s, Tuas Megaport will be the world's largest fully automated port. Now, at the core of it, there are 4 key approaches driving the 5 important optimization strategies that I've just mentioned earlier. The first is disciplined long-term planning. We have institutionalized this in our land use planning since the 1950s. Every 10 years, we undertake what we call a long-term plan review to plan 50 years into the future. Because land use changes take a long time to bring into effect. We then translate these planning strategies into a detailed master plan of every part of Singapore: housing, industry, recreation, healthcare, and more, for the next 10 to 15 years. Second, we bring agencies and stakeholders together to execute and implement effectively, preparing the land, putting in the infrastructure like roads and utilities and services, addressing pain points and disamenities as we roll out the projects and developments. Third, some plans are much longer term and benefit future generations. So we must be prepared to embark on projects that take decades to bear fruit and have the political will and the resources to follow through. These innovative projects are not easy, require time, effort, and resources to overcome complex technical challenges. Yet, we pursue them because the longer-term benefits are clear. They transform constraints such as land scarcity into catalysts for forward-thinking urban solutions and sustainable growth. For example, Long Island. It is an ambitious plan to reimagine our southeastern coast. It will protect our low-lying East Coast area against future sea level rise, and also create space for future needs such as housing, recreation, and jobs, and a new reservoir of fresh water to enhance our water security. It will take many decades to complete, and we've just started. But we have to start coastal protection work now, because the price of delay or failure will be too high for future generations to have to bear. Fourth, even while we plan for the long term, we should also stay nimble and agile, and be prepared to refresh our plans and even change them to keep pace with emerging trends and developments. This was particularly important during black swan events like the COVID pandemic. We had to find land and adapt spaces for additional medical facilities, for dorms, and other urgent uses. Now, while our 5 optimization strategies in urban planning and our 4 core approaches help us to overcome land and other constraints, there are 3 important enablers that must be in place to help us turn vision into reality. 1, technology, AI, and digital tools. We've always been pushing boundaries in using technology and digital tools to plan, design, and build more efficiently. Recent developments in artificial intelligence can only add to this. For example, the Digital and Planning Lab at the URA has been integrating GIS, or Geographical Information System technology, big data analytics, and modeling and simulation tools into the URA's urban planning processes. These help our planners to anticipate changes in demographic needs or activity, as well as mobility patterns, to enhance our precision, efficiency, and foresight. 2, we must engage the public and our stakeholders extensively and deeply. We conduct briefings, dialogues, town halls, citizen panels, and more to develop plans with the public and for people with different interests and perspectives to hear from one another. We do this for many of our major plans. In fact, just yesterday evening, I was at an engagement at URA with 160 young Singaporeans on our draft master plan. More than 100 questions. To better understand our evolving housing needs, we have also engaged 16,000 people in our Forward Singapore engagements since 2022. And this has guided real policy changes. I'll give you just one example. Due to public consensus in our housing conversations under Forward Singapore, we adjusted our public housing policy in 2023 to give even greater public housing priority for parents and married couples who are buying their very first home. As a result, about 9 in 10 of such applicants have so far been invited to book a flat in categories where they're given first priority at the first try. We also create Alliances for Action, or AFAs, where government partners Singaporeans to address common challenges. Each member contributes their perspectives and resources, and together as an Alliance for Action, we achieve more than the sum of our individual efforts. 3, our success has been anchored thus far by our strong social compact. This compact embodies a mutual understanding. While government is committed to doing its part, Singaporeans also play a critical role. For generations, Singaporeans have looked beyond our own personal interests and made sacrifices. Now, aspirations can outstrip the reality of our size and our resources. Yet a truly successful society is one where everyone succeeds together. And for this to happen, we must continue to foster a strong sense of collective responsibility and to constantly think of the next generation's needs. These principles are not new. Let me just talk about two examples where our pioneers also face trade-offs, in fact, far more intense than today, and make difficult but necessary decisions to open new pathways for Singapore's longer-term success. One example is public housing. In our early years, we started public housing and the HDB to address urgent housing shortages and poor living conditions. Our pioneers also had a clear vision that owning a home would give Singaporeans a strong stake in our fledgling nation. Now, for them, it was not just about building flats or estates, but building a nation. At the same time, there was no certainty that this was the better path. Like many other countries, we might have left it to the private sector, while the government provided basic housing as a social safety net. But they decided rightly that this would not have achieved the same social and economic outcomes. Home ownership could end up out of reach for many if left entirely to the private sector and market forces. So our pioneers chose to take the more difficult path. Government had to acquire land, and there was a large fiscal cost to build our public housing estates over the decades. But their vision has paid off. Today, around 80% of Singaporeans live in HDB public housing, and we have one of the highest homeownership rates in the world. Through our public housing system, we have been able to pursue many important social objectives. So housing not just as infrastructure, but principally as social policy, such as fostering an inclusive society, promoting multiculturalism, supporting the aspirations of families, and better supporting our seniors as they age in place, empowering vulnerable groups through policies like Compling Plus, for instance. As the largest developer of housing in Singapore, HDB also pushes the boundaries in technology adoption. Today, it is our turn to carry on the work that our pioneers started. But society evolves and our public housing policies must keep pace. For example, we want to ensure that all places remain accessible to Singaporeans from different walks of life. So we support social mixing in our public housing estates. We have seen that in other metropolitan cities and societies, homes in attractive locations, more central locations, are more expensive, and over time they become accessible only to the wealthy, while others are pushed further out into the suburbs or further in to deprived inner cities. This stratifies society and stokes tensions between different groups of the haves and the have-nots. To try to counter these forces, we implemented the new flat classification framework, Standard, Plus, and Prime. This major policy move will enable us to build affordable public housing in choicier and more central areas, such as the Greater Southern Waterfront, Bukit Timah, Turf City, and others, to keep our neighbourhoods and communities diverse, while ensuring that the system of public subsidies remain fair. Our public rental flats can also be found in more areas across Singapore, even in plus and prime locations, and integrated with other BTO flats. In fact, our very first prime location public housing project in Rochor has rental flats built in with soul flats. This gives our families in public rental housing better access too to the same facilities, schools, and other amenities. We cannot take present success for granted. We must continue to keep improving our foundations for our next generation. Let me highlight another foundational example, our city in nature. Today, we are one of the greenest cities in the world. We have nature reserves and nature areas in the heart of the city, parks and green spaces across the island, and diverse marine habitats in our waters. This did not happen by chance. Think about it. In the 1960s, newly independent and newly industrializing, small, densely populated Singapore could easily have become a concrete jungle, a city of brick, mortar, and steel, like so many other cities. In fact, if you look at old archival photos of Singapore and the city area, you won't see that many trees. But from the outset, our founding Prime Minister, the late Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, saw what greening could mean for Singapore. So the highly pragmatic idealist. He saw that it would give people respite from the city, distinguish ourselves and attract investments back then. Greenery could also be a social leveler, where all Singaporeans had access to green spaces. And so over the past 60 years, successive generations of Singaporeans have been stewarding our environment, intentionally building a green and livable city, even as we face ever more intense land use pressures. When we must continue this work so that future generations can enjoy the same livable environment. Now, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew once said, and I quote, "We face tremendous odds with an improbable chance of survival," unquote. And over the past 60 years, we've not just survived, but managed to thrive. Looking ahead, we will continue to face immense challenges. If we focus only on binary trade-offs, allow competing tensions to pull society apart, or fail to steward our land and resources well, then we risk succumbing to the odds of improbability. But our history has shown us that instead of choosing between one or the other, we have constantly found ways to try to do more with so much less, to grow our economy, create good jobs, while creating a livable home for Singaporeans, to build a thriving metropolis while respecting our heritage and natural environment. This is possible only because generations of Singaporeans have remained committed to one another through a strong social compact. As Prime Minister Lawrence Wong said during his budget speech, and I quote, "At every turn, we've chosen determination over despair, innovation over stagnation, and solidarity over division," unquote. Everything flows from this. Our ability to plan long-term, make trade-offs fairly, rally Singaporeans to make sacrifices for the common wider good, and deal with whatever challenges might come our way. With our refreshed social compact under Forward SG, I'm confident that we have what it takes for future challenges and opportunities, to turn future challenges into opportunities, and to bring Singapore to greater heights. With that, thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you, Minister, for sharing that. I think it's not surprising for any of us, when you have guests coming to visit from overseas, they'll say how green Singapore is. And it really is a remarkable sight, and it really is something that was, we made a concerted effort to do. And of course, when you take some of these risks, there are challenges because you don't know how it's going to turn out. And so there is a trade-off as well. Well, we're going to look more into this issue, and let me start inviting some of the guests up, because maybe Andrea can come on stage. She is from our flagship morning show on CNA 938, that's our radio station, Asia First, and she's also the popular Money Talks podcast. Yes. And she's going to be hosting our next panel.
Yeah.
And I believe as we chat, they can bring up the seats.
Yeah.
So that our guests will have somewhere to sit. But yeah, why don't you actually? How many of you have heard of Money Talks? I mean, we all know Money Talks,
fewer hands than yours. It's okay, you don't have to make me happy.
Yeah, give us the 30-second spiel.
Money Talks basically is a podcast by CNA. We talk about anything under the sun that involves personal finance. You want to talk about CPF, you want to talk about your MediSave, all those things involving the budget that just came out. That's where you want to tune into. We are released every Tuesday, so that's where you want to tune in. I am also, I assure you, always in your ear every weekday morning. I may not be as famous as you, Steve. But
no.
I'm always in your ear.
I'm way past the morning. Those early mornings are bygone era.
I'm glad you brought that up. It's a very early hours of the morning.
That's right.
That I'm in your ear, 7 to 10 a.m. on CNA 93 every Monday and to Friday. My trade-off is sleep.
Okay.
How I look like this is thanks to makeup. So I'll have to give credit to them.
And this was all not rehearsed, not in the script, but you can tell she works for radio, because if I don't stop her, she can keep on talking. Because it's a talk show.
And that's what I'm hired to do.
Okay,
that's why I'm sitting
here. So we got
today.
the chairs up. I'm going to head off stage. Andrea,
thank
stage
you
is
for
all
sharing
yours.
the stage with me. Thank you very much. Once again, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the CNA Summit. Really glad to have you with us today. It is an honor to share the stage here with our esteemed panelists, also to be in the presence of your of all of you as well. Now, as Stephen introduced, I'm Andrea Heng, host of the Money Talks podcast, as well as Asia First on CNA 938. I assure you, what I do in the mornings, it's worth the trade-off of sleep. So, for today's panel, we're focusing on internal trade-offs. Now, these are the difficult decisions that leaders have to face within their organizations. Judgment calls on internal dynamics that have an impact on internal stakeholders like you and me, processes and resources. These can include talent management. How do we manage our workforce to encompass both expertise and diversity? You want to have everyone covered under the umbrella. Resource allocation. How do we prioritize between innovation and efficiency? Organizational design. Taking a look at centralization and decentralization of those processes, of those resources that you have, while acquiring new ones. Leadership style. That's what you're here for. Encouraging autonomy while maintaining a sense of balance in control. And cultural transformation, striking a balance between preserving heritage and driving change, because that's what you need to grow. Now, the questions that they must ask themselves, all to achieve a sustainable vision for your organization. So, it's a lucky day for you and me, because I'm honored to be accompanied by leaders in each of their organizations, in each of their own rights. Let me introduce my panelists now and invite them on stage. Ms. Pearlyn Phau, Group Chief Executive Officer of Singlife. And she will be joined by Mr. Tibor Pandi, Singapore Country Officer and Banking Head of Citi. And last but certainly not least, filling up the last seat there, Mr. Kok Ping Soon. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Singapore Business Federation. Yeah, have a seat. A nice in pink in the middle there, the rose. All right, so let's kick things off. We want to first do some housekeeping notes here. Well, ladies and gentlemen, while we are getting comfortable, think about some of the questions that you want to ask our panelists today. Then submit them via the QR code that you see on your tables. Scan it. Key in the password CNA 2025 when prompted. We will take your questions towards the end of the session, so you do have some time to formulate and decide what you want to ask our panelists. All right, and we will take your questions at the end of towards the end of the session. We'll leave plenty of time for that. All right, let's get started. Are we ready, ladies and gentlemen? All right, so we kick things off with you, Tibor, right at the end there. Tell us about the most pivotal point in your own career where you were identified as a promising talent for an employer to groom you into what you are today.
Well, okay. This is a question that I'm sometimes asking myself, like, how did I get to where I am? And, I think it actually comes down to the, maybe courage of one man who back about 30 years ago, decided to take a punt and take a risk and just hire me from the outside of the organization. And we're talking about the trade-offs here. And, I started back in 1995 with ABN AMRO. And after having a few discussions with the then CEO, he decided to give me a chance. And he took a risk. And instead of simply just leaving it to the HR, or some business heads, or simply just saying, none of my business, he actually took the risk of maybe going against a little bit the usual norm, and instead of just taking somebody from the inside, he decided to say, well, maybe this boy at that time has some potential. So clearly that was a lifelong lesson to me, right, that I'm trying also to replicate in my practice, because it showed leadership, showed some courage, and also as a CEO, he has shown that he honestly cared about talent and went that extra step, not only for me, but for many other colleagues in his practice later on. So, as I said, this created not only a loyalty on my end, but from the whole team that was hired in that way. And I have to say that cohort has become part of a very robust, long training program. A team was built that is connected even 30 years later. And again, it was just because somebody decided to do something a little bit out of the ordinary.
He took a chance on you. So from those, okay. I had to slip it in. I'm from radio. So from those lessons, Tibor, we make this observation that the typical recruitment process is, you scour what's out there, you search for that talent. For and within those companies, and then typically this starts with recruitment. You identify the right kind of talent for that role, and then you pursue further development for that talent as a means of retaining it, right? So it's one thing to secure the talent, and it's another to recognize that, hey, this talent has the potential to go even further. Would you say that process still exists in that exact order?
Yeah, I would say, generally it does, right? You go through the identification of the talent, and you then try to create pathways and means for the talent to strive in the organization. Now, I think what has maybe changed over time is that, for global firms, it is becoming more and more challenging to attract talent. If you think about what happened after COVID, priorities of the workforce has changed. And also the new generations that we need to deal with has a very different view of what career is about. And while back in the day, and I'm kind of dating myself here, it was a big thing to join an international and just go around and see as many countries. Maybe that's not what is important to the Gen Zs and others, right? So how do you drive that so that you can create an interesting employee value proposition for talent and keep them is what is making things difficult, right? So how do we maintain a balance between the company needs global talent, but the talent may not need a global company? And therefore, we're trying to develop various tools that will help talent stay. And for those that we hire, we try to hire the kind of profile that wants to be with Citi. What does that mean? That our vision, that our value proposition, that our mission aligns with what they want to achieve in their lives. But equally, we're really doing a lot to develop talent locally. Like, for example, here in Singapore, we're trying to ensure that people locally have ways to learn, develop, and get various different pathways, be it jumping from one business to another, or maybe going between businesses or within the business. Now, what we're also trying to do is make sure that we keep track of, let's say, our Singaporeans, and we have about 100 of them everywhere globally, and try to see what they've learned. Can we use that by bringing them back? So it's a mix of tools that we constantly need to kind of balance, given the change in the talent pool and what people consider important.
Yeah, the theme I'm taking away from this is agility. You have to be nimble all the time as a leader.
Yes.
Now, Ping Soon, let's bring you into the conversation. How would you go about identifying someone whom you see the potential to not just fit the role, but the company's culture as well? That's really important, and I think most often overlooked as well. But also to groom and hopefully get them to ride the company's journey as well. So it's a personal journey, as you said, Tibor, but also the company's journey is important as well. And that's always an uncertain thing. It's not a set image that we have in our minds, right? So how do we identify someone who has that ability and promise to ride the wave of the company with you, get them for the long term?
I think, thanks for that question. I would start by saying that I think leading any organization today is more difficult. And I think it is the most difficult period of times for leadership. I think over lunch, we were just talking about this whole disruption and uncertainties are just increased. Over lunch, we were just talking about nothing about this panel. We're talking about what, it's not even 100 days, and guess what President Trump has done? He has upended the whole economic order.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So the geopolitical uncertainties are real. You talk about the technological disruptions, right? From ChatGPT to DeepSeek. You talk about the need for energy transition. And all this is happening when a workforce is expecting greater autonomy, greater empowerment, greater flexibility, greater mobility. So it is not easy to be a leader today. So the question is, what do you look out for? I was quite intrigued. The minister has a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm not going to have a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But maybe let me offer five traits of what I look for in a leader. Number one, I think no surprise, you need somebody who has some skills and competency, so you can measure that kind of by IQ, right? And just now, Yok King talked about EQ. So I think these two people are familiar with. I'll just add 3 more Qs, into this basket.
There's a Q for the Q.
It's a Q for the Q. Yeah, that's right. The third Q, I suppose, is LQ. I think we talked a lot about it. Do you look for somebody who is very good at that role, or somebody who may not be very good at that role, but you can sense in that person the willingness and the ability to learn? The reality is that you may not know everything, and you must be prepared to do that. And I think that's what that boss of yours look out for you, right? You probably don't know a lot of the job, but you're prepared to learn. So you look for people who are no longer kind of know it all, but kind of learn it all. And I think today, in today's age, where skills are deteriorating at such a fast pace, is absolutely important. So we look for that learning quotient. The fourth Q, and I like that picture, is a trade-off, right? So let's talk about a serious trade-off. And I call it the values quotient. I'm sure every one of you in your organizations has values. It's probably listed somewhere.
Somewhere on the web page.
Somewhere on the web page, somewhere on the wall. But is your organization living it up? Are those values actually translated to actual behaviors? And are these behaviors used as a guide for you to decide about talent? You want to talk about trade-off? Let's talk about the trade-off between values and performance. Right? So if you can imagine, any consultant will have a 2x2 box. You've got some paper and pen. If you can't visualize it, you can draw that 2x2 box on your paper. So draw a 2x2, your y-axis, performance, right? Low and high. Your x-axis, values, low and high. It's very simple when you have to deal with people on the top right-hand box. High in performance, high in values, you reward them, right? People who are on your diagonally bottom left, quite simple, right? Low in performance, low in values, replace them. But the challenge is on the other two, right? What if you have somebody who is not so good in performance, it's not incompetent, but performance level not so good, but super aligned with your organization? What do? Do you remove them? I would suggest you don't. I would suggest you, especially in Singapore, when you have a very tight labor market, I think you need to redeploy. Maybe it's not a good job fit. You need to retrain them. But I think the biggest, at least for me, in the past organization I led, is to deal with that person who is up there, who is your star player, is a high performer, bring the bacon home, but very low alignment with your company. What do? Do you have the moral courage to actually replace that person? That's not easy.
Yeah.
So I think you really need to pay attention to that. Now, the last quotient that I will throw in, right, is what I call the personality quotient.
Okay.
Right? I think in today's day and age, positive energy is important. I think for leaders to succeed, you need to kind of know what makes you tick. You need to look for people who knows how to develop and protect their mind, their body, and spirit. Right? Especially in today's uncertainty and the need to really learn and relearn. If you don't have the energy to know what does it do to make you tick, it's going to be challenging. Particularly now, when leaders or your people are looking for more connection with you, more authenticity, and more inspiration, you really need to find that.
Yeah.
Now, if you can find that person, let me know, because I'm looking to hire that person.
I'll take your phone number down later. And I want to be devil's advocate here, because we talk about how we hire talent, how to look out for the right talent, the right fit for our companies. What about the flip side? How do we assess and determine what to look out for in a leader that we want to follow, that we're inspired by, in order to, because sometimes it's organic, right? It's one thing to have that box, but it's also the leader that's in charge of that box, that's overseeing that box, that needs to inspire confidence in their workers to, okay, maybe I want to be changing this. I want to be changing my attitude at work. What kind of traits must that leader have?
So the leader has to be empathetic. The leader has to be able to have that honest conversation with that person. And I think, people can fake it once or twice during interviews, but nothing beats some kind of reference check and just having that honest conversation and put on the person on certain assignment and really see whether is there a dissonance between what he says he do and what he actually does.
Walking the talk.
Pearlyn,
over to you now. I wonder if you've experienced developing talent that you've eventually had to release to the big wide world after you've groomed them? Let them leave your company, let them leave your side to allow them to grow further. I mean, it's quite a big trade-off. It's a sacrifice as a leader to groom this person, invest so much, only to say, I think this is the end for you. I need you. I think you need to go further in life. How did that feel?
I think it all boils down to what your intent is, right? Are we building careers, or are we just filling a job, right? Are we just looking at the talent there purely to fill up a job opening? I think it's only natural that talents are poached and targeted. That's why they are talents, right? And the more they are poached and targeted means the better the job the company must be doing in developing and exposing the person's capabilities to the industry. We don't necessarily have to look at it as a sacrifice. I think, of course, it's always, with a little bit of regret that, somebody that you've been investing in has decided to join the outside world, if you will, right? But I do believe that it can be a win-win for the individual and for the organization. For the individual, we hope that the individual goes out, learns new experiences, and comes back one day.
I realize the grass is not always greener on the other side.
That's right. Sometimes they just have to go out there to experience it and hopefully come back bigger, better, stronger. It also gives the organization an opportunity to ventilate and perhaps surface the next generation of new leaders into bigger roles, right? And thirdly, I do think it does a lot for the reputation of the company. Because if you develop talents well and you invest in your talent, it does speak a lot about how long-term and how sustainable the company is for the long run. So I myself have had the privilege of working for two great companies. And these two great companies have spawned many talents that have gone on to bigger, better things. And today, these two companies have the reputation as a breeding ground for talents and future leaders. So, it does speak a lot about that, especially when it comes to talent recruitment. And when you go out to universities, for example, right, and you're able to cite past successes that you have groomed, I think that speaks a lot about the company. And it also gives food for thought for us as we lose our talents, whether it's time for us to refresh and relook and improve our own talent program as well.
Tibor, I was recently told that some people are the star talent, others are soldiers. Very much like the model that you put out earlier, Ping Soon. The thing is, leaders need both. You do need both. When you look at your workforce in today's context, and you're deciding how to allocate training resources for talent development, what are the trade-offs you're willing to make for that bigger outcome?
Well, banking, but I guess any organization is a team sport. So I personally, at least, don't like to think of the continuum of our talent pool as stars and then soldiers, because that implies you can kind of sacrifice them easily, and then wherever else, right? It's more like a soccer team where, that particular, traditionally speaking, star who kind of always scores, can't do that if there is no perfect execution along the chain. So that, of course, is one principle. The other one is we do have to have a meritocracy. And in meritocracies, back to your point, like that we have to be able to measure performance and make some tough decisions along those lines. We are developing very transparent frameworks within which everyone knows if they're a star or if they have some room to improve. So it's not going to be based on some, someone's whim or some soft, undefinable metrics. So that's important as well. So what we need to then also take into consideration as managers or leaders is the third concept, which is the availability of talent. And you referred to that as well, here, both of the panelists, which is that we are competing in a space where we are kind of losing talent, gaining talent, producing talent just to export it. we need to make sure that value proposition that we have, remains relevant for our star performers. So therefore, in a way, what we want to achieve is that everyone knows that they can become a star within their own speciality, and then they will be taken care of. But it's equally clear, and has to be clear, that if somebody does not perform, it has consequence. The availability for growth and learning is there for everybody. And we at Citi believe in exposure and experience and formal education, where experience is about 70% of someone's growth, exposure is about 20, and let's say 10 is in fact your formal learning, because you do come into a job at the end of the day learning. So what we want to do is communicate to employees that they have to take ownership of their careers as well. They have to do their part to become stars. We will definitely do everything in our power to make sure that they can perform. And of course, as you become a star, you get that much more resource.
Kingston, I want to tap on your experience here. As CEO, you'd also have to contend with competing internal priorities that are basically competing for your attention, while also mapping out how to allocate these talent development resources effectively, right? You've been CEO of GovTech, a public agency, and now you're a CEO of SBF. It's a business chamber, and it's an NGO. What is one thing that's worked for you in terms of the balance between delivering business results, your KPI, and investing in talent development as well at the same time?
I think it's not an either or. And first of all, I really like what Pearlyn said, about, and I think when I listen to what you say about the two organizations that you joined, the thing that comes to my mind that those two organizations epitomizes what I call their talent factories. And now that we're the CEO of SBF, I really like to call out to all businesses out there, do not be afraid to lose your talent. I think the trademark of a good organization, a great organization, is that, you are a talent factory. Right, because about talent, circulation of talent, and you want to get boomerangs back anyway. And you want to make sure that, the time that your guys spend in your organization is a CV enhancing experience and not a CV depreciation experience. But I want to go back to your question, right, that as I said, it's not an either or. I think, and one of the challenges for leaders nowadays is the managing of dualities, right? How do you deliver today, and how do you transform the organization for tomorrow? How do you deal with external stakeholders to deliver value, and dealing with your internal stakeholders, the largest which are employees? You mentioned GovTech, and I would say that I had the privilege to steward GovTech for a period of 5 years. And a bit of preamble is needed so that I can share a bit of personal story if you ask me for, right? Yeah, so GovTech, it was an organization formed 6-7 years ago. At that time, it was called the Infocom Development Authority. It has 3 roles. Number 1 is a regulator of the telecoms industry, so collect a lot of licensing fees. And number 2, it is a developer of the ICT industry in Singapore. And number 3 is the CIO for the government. So through some government reorganization, the first 2 roles was taken out, combined with Media Development Authority, to form the well-loved IMDA that I'm sure you all know very well of in CNA. So what's left behind for GovTech is to be the CIO of the organization. So I came in at point of GovTech. In terms of organization transformation in my mind, I did not join an organization where the organization is at the fork of the road. Right. The decision has been taken before me, right? It is about rebuilding engineering capability for Singapore, and how can you do that? So I really joined the organization at that point where I had to undergo what I call a dual transformation. It's about how do you move an organization and rebuild engineering capability for you to deliver the digital government. How do you move from project management to product management? How do you do from outsource to insource? How do you move from waterfall to agile? Hence, what can we do? What do I need to do? The challenge that I face is what I call our clothes don't fit anymore. And because when I joined the organization, it's about 1,008. When I left, it's about 4,000. And over that period of time, it's really how do you optimize the current workforce, right, to change the way you do things, but at the same time build a new capacity so that the what is also different. So in a way, it's a dual transformation. And doing that is not easy. And it goes back to the value quotient, right? There are some people who may not be very good performers, but align with the organization. Do you kind of sack them all and then bring a new bunch? You can't. But to grow that new what, you have to pay special attention. So long story short, we had to set up a government digital services, hire a bunch of people, which is a very different profile from what we had in 2008. And we got to set it up very differently, even put it away from the main HQ, different pay scheme, different career path, and so on and so forth. It looks good. It goes on. But what do you do as a leader when you have both trying to transform optimizing the current workforce and build a new workforce? If you don't do it well, you end up a very bimodal organization. You end up against us, against them. So how do you then thoughtfully build the capabilities, the process, and the linkages between the people who are in the existing as well as them? And the way I think about it, and I like, since it was from Minister Desmond Lee, and he was using the urban planning metaphor. So I will explain and the way we think about it in GovTech, organization with 4,000 people, is to remind everybody that, yes, everybody has a role. And it's quite useful to use this metaphor. And it's not soldiers and stars. It's really saying that I need people who are pioneers. Minister used that word. People who can bring from 0 to 1. But I need the settlers too. People who can bring from 1 to 10. But then I need town planners too. People who can bring 10 to 100 because the whole system is wide. The challenge for any leader is how do you find the right people in each of these, get them to understand that they all need to work together and deliver on the mission.
That's right. Fusing the two together. We are coming close to the Q&A session now, so I hope that you've taken the time to scan that QR code and to submit what questions you have for our panelists. We're not done with them yet. There will be more opportunities to hear them speak. Thank you for sharing your initial thoughts with us, panelists. Let's move on now to the Q&A session now. Let me just pick this up from the pigeonhole situation here. So, the first question that's come up on the Q&A, and this is addressed to all of you. Please let me know if you would like to answer first. What is the one trait that you think is the greatest predictor of an employee's career path to reach CEO? This is a question my husband asks me every day. Can you go and be a CEO so that I can play music every day of his life? So I'm not going to ask you to identify if I can be CEO, but what would be the predictor? Pearlyn, you want to take this one?
I won't say it's a predictor, but it's just causing me to reflect on some trade-offs that I, in my experience, have had to make when we come towards identifying leadership or potential leaders. It's really about matching ambition, aspiration with ability and aptitude. So sometimes you have somebody who has so much potential, you see the potential in the person, and you see that the person is going to make big strides and is going to do really well. But I think it is equally important to match the person's ambition and aspiration and whether the person wants to get there. Because oftentimes, no matter how hard you try to drag it out of the person and you see that this guy is going to do so well, if he doesn't have the aspiration to do it, he can be a theoretical CEO material, but he will never want to be.
A reluctant CEO. While I have you speaking to us, Pearlyn, there's another question that is specific for you. What was the most significant trade-off you made that paid off handsomely?
Wow. Well, if I reflect on my own career, I've always been a career banker and always in distribution, in sales, in consumer banking, in wealth management, never been in a manufacturing role. And as I look back 4 years ago, joining Singlife was like crossing over to the dark side, right? We always say you've crossed over to the dark side. It was a gamble. But I have to say it gave me the opportunity to build a company, to build a culture, to bring people together and to serve a better good. And we truly believe the insurance industry is here to really protect everyone and not just to sell you the next policy. So I think, I felt was a gamble at that time. It was a little bit of getting out of my comfort zone. But looking back, I think it has really paid off personally and professionally.
Okay, there are a couple of questions that are pretty similar, and I think it's an interesting one as well. Sometimes talents may be mismatched in a different industry, has developed in a different industry from yours. Would you consider them? What would make them appealing if they do not have direct experience? Tibor, do you want to take this one?
Can I get the previous one?
Sorry, missed your turn.
No, absolutely. In fact, as we hire, we already look outside what would be the usual finance training, right, or the usual business school. We have people who have studied sociology, anthropology, natural sciences. So comes back to the adaptability that we've been talking about of our hiring policies to what the talent pool looks like. And as a bank, we are not only about selling your next credit card or a loan or a structured transaction. There's so many other things. And we, as we are part of the society, we also need to be staffed with people who come from different parts of the society. So the answer is absolutely and emphatically yes.
I'll take a stab at that, and I would say absolutely yes. I think increasingly you shouldn't just be hiring for subject matter expertise. You look for adjacency skills. And I'll go back and my quick answer to that one trait of the Qs that I mentioned, I'll pick LQ, right? It is really that ability, with that hunger, the ability to learn and relearn that we are really looking for. Because today nobody knows it all. Yeah. So I think really focus on that.
Yeah. And if I can add on, right, I think, you definitely need the core bench strength, right? Subject matter specialist. But today's world is so complicated and complex that, as I look back, when we grew Singlife, I mean, we are hiring people from CNA, for instance, right? We have a lawyer.
Be careful, your cane, she's looking. She's not selling policies, she's looking for your people.
I'm saying, my boss is here, I'm saying.
No, we've hired, our head of HR is legally trained, right? So we are looking at people with very different exposures and very different mindsets. We like lawyers, we like engineers, and we are in the financial industry. So I definitely believe that, groupthink is a big problem. And needs are getting so complex that you really need skills and exposures from very different disciplines.
There are so many questions to get through, but we have time for just one more, and I'm going to pick this one because I think it is a perennial problem for many leaders out there. How can you do the right but unpopular thing while still getting support from your staff? And I think this is open to all of you.
Well, maybe I can take a stab at it. All of us have to do this, right? In my experience, there is only one strategy that always works, and that is total transparency.
That's right.
You build trust every day with everything you do. And even if you do something that is not popular or hard, people will not like it, but hopefully they will, over time, understand it. If you do these things consistently through good times and bad times, you will build that trust and that credibility that then you can use when times, get tough. So that, being just honest with people is something that I found always worked. And then fair, because at the end, people want respect and want to be treated with respect, even if, whatever the decision is may not go in their favor. So that was, the thing that worked for me. I don't know.
Just quickly, absolutely, the honesty is the best policy. But also then back it up, by being authentic and most importantly, engage. You just have to kind of keep over-engaging.
I think open communication is important. I do think, apart from talent management, right, just really sharing the rationale and the logic behind specific key strategic initiatives or directives that the company has decided to pursue, whether the group is junior, not junior, top team or not. I do think that when people understand why the company has chosen to adopt or go towards a certain direction, you get more buy-in and execution will become a lot better.
Tibor, Pearlyn, Ping Soon, thank you once again for gracing the stage with me today, sharing your experience, your advice as well, and insights with us today. These are really nuanced perspectives on reconciling, conflicting objectives, a lot of things competing for your attention as CEO, as leaders. Especially when you have a strategy that you have to achieve. It's an unenviable position to be in, certainly. And, it's a constantly evolving environment also, as we all pointed out, especially today. Your insights have been absolutely valuable, so thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a short break of about 30 minutes, light snacks, drinks available to you, and it will be served at your table, so you can just sit and hang out. And while you're munching, we're going to bring you a preview of a CNA program called Singapore's Balancing Act on Tradeoffs.
And welcome back to the YouTube and LinkedIn live stream of the CNA Summit, Trade-offs in Leadership. I'm Elizabeth Neo, your host for this segment. Now, we've just heard from Singapore Minister for National Development, Desmond Lee, and our panelists from the first session, which looked at the internal trade-offs that business leaders face. Now, this examined the tough choices that they must make on internal dynamics within the organization that impact internal stakeholders, of course, the processes and resources like talent management, resource allocation, organizational design, leadership style, cultural transformation, just to name a few. And before that, we also heard from MediaCorp CEO, Ms. Tham Lok Keng, who talked about the landscape that we face today that's come to be defined by the acronym VUCA, which is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and the considerations that business leaders have to make in navigating. And of course, there's plenty more coming up today right here at the summit at Pan Pacific Singapore, including another panel discussion and more live interviews with business leaders and other heads of organizations. Now, before we move on to our next interview, allow me to take a moment to just thank our partners for the CNA Summit, Trade-offs in Leadership. Our presenting partner is Singlife. Our impact partner is the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center, or NPVC. And our main partner is OPPO.
We're done with our dream eco home. Thanks to our helpful neighbor. Now, we can finally start on that 50,000-piece jigsaw puzzle.
Sorry to interrupt. Eco Home jigsaw puzzles.
Possible?
Can. Singlife has a plan for you. But I can't promise Phau.
Whatever your dream, Singlife is here to help you achieve it with financial freedom.
Better way.
When you look after your people, they will look after the customers and the business will take care of each other. So every time we are faced with a challenge, we choose purpose because we want to serve the communities within which we operate.
At Greenpack, partnership is very important to us. We like to do business with like-minded companies who has a mission of contributing to the future of sustainability.
I feel it deep in my bones. Weightless and airborne. Skyline leads and all we know is riding where the dreams are born.
Welcome back. You're watching the YouTube and LinkedIn live stream at CNA Summit 2025. Now, balancing profit and purpose is no easy task, especially in a small country like Singapore. And so joining us to share how the NVPC navigates this is Tony So, CEO of the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center. So, Tony, it's really good to talk to you again at the summit. Welcome. Of course, the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center's mission is to promote a culture of volunteerism and philanthropy.
Yes.
But how do you bridge profit and purpose?
Yeah. This is an excellent question. I think for us to promote the culture of philanthropy and volunteerism, obviously we want to go for all Singaporeans to get involved because it's a culture. So on one part, we do digital giving through digitalgiving.sg. That becomes a digital platform that we invite all Singaporeans to give in their different ways. Of course, we work with non-profits. But when we talk about profit and purpose, really the point is that apart from trying to engage individual Singaporeans, a good place to get them started in volunteerism and donations and so forth is really through the companies, through the places where they work. And so we want to be able to encourage companies to begin to understand that their role in society can be very important because they have lots of resources. You know, they have financial, human, intellectual resources. And where companies think that they could in the past do corporate social responsibility and it's one-off, it's by the way, we are thinking of how we can convert them and help them think about going from corporate giving to corporate purpose. And the purpose really is that beyond making profits, the purpose of an organization is really to have much greater impact on society, to be a force for good in society. And so that's the work we do. We try and encourage companies to do that. And in doing so, I think we mobilize large numbers of people who work in these companies to begin to give, to volunteer, to donate, but also to engage in other areas like skilled volunteering, contributing their skills to charities, contributing the way that they can mobilize their friends, they can also advocate for causes. So it really helps us, in terms of mobilizing companies. It promotes an aspect of volunteerism that really helps to accelerate the idea that everyone can give.
It's interesting because when we talk about resources, a small country and a resource-scarce Singapore, are there any unique trade-offs that agencies like yours face, especially when it comes to dealing with competing priorities, right?
Yes. I mean, Singapore, we are a small country, so in many cases, we're short of time, people are busy. So the thing for us is volunteerism. How can we make it easy? How can we make it bite-sized? How can we make it such that, again, in the workplace, where employees are supportive, they can actually contribute back to society. So that's how we overcome constraints, because we look at places where there are resources. We look at places where actually there are large reservoirs of untapped resources. And we think companies are the way to go. And companies, I think, have also seen that the way that they can be more purpose-driven actually helps them in terms of their employee retention. It helps them in terms of building trust with customers and also enhancing the attractiveness to investors. So I think it's going to be win-win. And we think that the way that we want to really promote volunteerism and philanthropy, really working through companies, will be a very important game changer.
I mean, it's always nice to have a win-win. Sometimes you can't, and then when you have to navigate trade-offs, I mean, the goal is to ultimately not lose too much when you make that sort of trade-offs, right? And so, what sort of mindset, what sort of skills do you think someone in your role needs to have, especially when you work with companies?
I think it's a mindset of building partnership, building collaboration through strengthening trust. I think win-win, of course, everyone maybe thinks that going to a partnership, one might win more than others. But in any partnership, you can't have your maximum win. You can't have 100%. You do have to offer something in return for something that you get, and likewise on the other side. So I think for us to be able to bring more organizations into this work, to invite partnerships and collaborations, about building trust and recognizing that we give up something such that we grow the pie, everyone gets better. And ultimately for this area of work, is about Singapore really enjoying the benefits of more people contributing to strengthening our society.
And also, how do you then communicate, these trade-offs, which may not be so nice or so positive to communicate? How do you communicate them to stakeholders, especially when you have to answer to your donors, your volunteers, as well as your recipients?
I think it's a really good question, because it's not always easy that people see immediate payoff, immediate benefit, immediate win. But we also do need to articulate a broader perspective. Sometimes it's a time issue, right? You invest something, you may not see immediately, but encourage them to see medium to long term. That's going to how it comes back. Sometimes it's
because it's not guaranteed.
It's not guaranteed.
How do you convince them? That
show evidence that this has worked. Show evidence that in small ways, when we do pilots or small trials, it has worked. We can scale it. We can bring the benefit to more segments of society, but also how it brings benefit to different stakeholders, so that people who may think that I'm just giving to one segment, let's say to lower income family, actually it impacts caregivers, it impacts the extended families, and to be able to see the broader picture, how those kinds of contributions actually make a greater impact in society. So really trying to widen the scope and widen the perspective, so that they see something more comprehensively.
Again, the communication from you, that is going to be very important. Tony,
you.
always appreciate you coming on to talk to us, especially at our CNA Summit. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And that was Tony So. He is the Chief Executive Officer at the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre, NVPC. Tony is going to be on the second panel discussion for this summit, and that's going to take place in the ballroom later at 3:45 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. We're going to to be taking you there at that time, and you can definitely hear more from him then on the external trade-offs in leadership. Now, I want to take a look at another extract from CNA's documentary, Leadership Unlimited, where we see how bridging diverse voices together can drive sustainable innovation. Have a look.
Each one of them has some slice of genius in them, and my job is to bring that out. And the idea is that you have all these people working together like the Borg Collective that are collaborating together, and they can produce more than they can individually produce. So traditional leaders are focused on causing people to execute, to get the job done, to meet performance goals, to minimize differences, to have a not noisy company of complainers, right? But that is what you had to do in companies of 30 years ago, but I don't think that's sufficient today. I think you have to do that, and you have to think about what you could be doing. And in order to look at what you could be doing, you have to be amplifying differences. You have to create an environment that brings out the best in everyone.
The platform to create such an environment is a brain trust meeting.
Let's say you're a year into the film. How can we verify that we're on track? Why don't we show the film to everybody in the company and ask them what they think? We show everybody the film, and everybody in the company is allowed to make comments, including the janitor, including somebody in accounting, including somebody in the IT department. So if you get 50 people saying, I didn't understand what was going on here, the director might want to think about that. We show the film, collect all the notes, give the director feedback, rinse and repeat. Go for another year, do the exact same thing, and rinse and repeat. So the brain trust is really looking at the nitty-gritty details of what we're going to do to change things or make it better. Having all these different slices of genius and diverse points of view, you will always come up with a better solution. Teams of people will outperform individuals all day long.
Now, great products aren't built in isolation. Every employee's input helps shape the result. In the fast-paced smartphone industry, teamwork is essential to balancing innovation and accessibility. And joining us now is Andy Shi. He's the president of OPPO Asia Pacific. So, Andy, it's really good to have you on. We appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us here at the CNA Summit. I want to talk about, this highly competitive smartphone market in Asia. Literally every corner you turn, someone has a smartphone in their hands. And so how is OPPO staying ahead? Has it had to make any significant trade-offs?
I'm actually very glad to know that we are ranking number one across Southeast Asia in terms of sales volume in the last year. And here locally in Singapore, we're ranking number 3. This is not an easy ranking for us because it's a very high barrier market in Singapore. It's one of the most premium markets across the globe. But my work is not really measured by how many phones that we sell every year, but really like how people are perceive OPPO as a brand, how much people are supporting and loving the OPPO brand. So in that regard, we still have a long way to go. So the secret is not really like my trade-off is not really how that I sell more phones every day, how I close business deals with my partners, but really like doing the research, understand our consumers and give them the right product. It looks more like a sales position for me, but in fact, it's more like a product position that I really have to understand my consumers across Southeast Asia, understand the high-end market like Singapore, and also understand the mass market like in Indonesia, and give them different but fitting different consumers products for different consumer and target groups.
OPPO's mission is technology for mankind, kindness for the world. And so with OPPO, planning to expand its generative AI capabilities, how does it ensure that it is done in an inclusive way and that its product remains accessible to all. Is it possible to have both, scale up in innovation, yet remain inclusive and accessible to customers within the company as well?
Actually, last year we already introduced the generative AI capabilities across all our product lines here in Southeast Asia. So no matter you are a foldable phone user or just a $150 phone user, you will have access to the latest technology of AI, because we see that this is really important for all the consumers. It's not just for the professionals or the premium segments that they want the latest technologies to work more efficiently, to have more fun. It also could be the relatively poor communities that they also want to have the fun of the AI capabilities, such as maybe as easy as a photo enhancement, photo fun. They just change the background or remove some parts of the phones using our AI erasers, so that I think it's very important for everybody to enjoy the technology. Yeah. We believe that technology is not just for the newest advancement, but also it could be solving social problems and really closing the digital divide. As AI is developing so fast, we seen ourselves in this position that we can do something more to bring the fun to everyday consumers.
Indeed. So you also have this social responsibility to bridge gaps between communities, as you talked about, right? Like the smartphone being a tool to bring together people from, say, more marginalized communities, helping them to move up sort of social ladder as well. Andy, really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you so much.
At the CNA Summit. Thanks for joining us.
My honor.
Andy Shi there, he is President APAC at OPPO, and if you want to hear more from Andy, do stay on our YouTube and LinkedIn Live, because Andy will also be on the second panel discussion for this summit. It's going to be happening in a short while from now, 3:45 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. We will, of course, take you there to the ballroom where you can hear more on the external trade-offs in leadership. And before that, let's explore how strong leadership balances bold decision-making with empathy. Now, this next video examines how staying objective and level-headed can create a competitive edge.
I strongly believe in excellence and empathy. And empathy to me is the big ears. It's listening. It's putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. And if I was in their shoes, how would I want to hear bad news or good news or other pieces? And I think that becomes a competitive edge. But as a leader, I have to be decisive. I have to be bold. We have clarity of vision. We're looking at a firm with tremendous potential. So it's the passion and energy and that belief that comes from it. But you have to be completely honest about and dispassionate. Where are we? What's working? What's not working? If you've made a bad decision on something, there's another decision.
And now that brings us to our next interview that looks at the trade-offs facing startups. So innovation is key in the fast-paced world, but it needs to be balanced with trust and connection, particularly in fields like veterinary care. And so we're joined by Desmond Lee, CEO and co-founder of ZoomVet, who is at the forefront of bringing digital solutions to pet owners. So Athena, thanks for joining us, and it's really great to be able to hear from you as a pet owner myself. And so talk to us, about the unique trade-offs that you experience in your industry, which is not just vet care, but it's also tech. So it's veterinary and then, tech, right? How does that come together, and what type of unique challenges do you face?
Absolutely. So coming into ZoomVet as a founder, I had always worked with corporations. And I've always, had that sort of expectation of how you work in a corporate setting. And so coming into pet care, what I realized is that it's a very fragmented industry. And so you are constantly having to deal with, vets, with, individual pet shop owners, entrepreneurs, and you really have to roll up your sleeve and just get out there and talk to people in a way that they would understand, because a lot of people in the industry are very passion driven, and I think you have to match that level of passion as well. And I think one of the biggest trade-offs was just how do we throw ourselves into this space having not come from this industry.
Right. And so tell me about your personal story. I mean, scaling up the business, that's no easy feat. And so some of the sacrifices, the trade-offs that you experience, and also you talk about, being the pet, people are very passionate, right? Not just the owners, but I'm sure people who are, veterinary vets as well, even the shop owners who are pet stores as well. I mean, you have to love animals to want to get into the business, right? And so from your experience, what kind of sacrifices have you had to make?
Yeah, so going into this, it was a passion project. So I have 3 cats myself, and it was no question that I wanted to start this business. But it wasn't until I became a founder that I realized how much it consumes your life. And so when we had first launched it, it was actually during COVID. And I think one of the biggest trade-offs was there was this global pandemic going on. My family was overseas, actually, at the time. But I was starting this business. I was growing very quickly, as you can imagine, because people needed a telemedicine digital health solution. So I was spending mainly 20 hours per day on the startup. We didn't have, infrastructure yet. We didn't have the vets. So on the one hand, we're trying to do sales, sign on new pet owners and new vets, but also having to start this business. And so it was quite difficult, but it was led by passion.
Yeah, indeed. And your passion has led you to raise nearly $5 million from investors. As a startup, talk to us about, having to balance investor expectations with the company's vision and purpose, which may not always be aligned. And how do you sort of navigate these challenges? What is it like communicating with your startups and yet staying true to the company's mission and vision?
Yeah. So when we first started, as I mentioned, it's a passion project. And so we weren't really quite sure whether we even wanted to take external investor money. And so something that I was very careful of in order to ensure that our expectations were aligned was to be careful about how we were choosing investors. And so while they were trying to scout for a good opportunity, we were also making sure that we were asking the right questions. And so I think in terms of balancing trade-offs, number one is put yourself in a situation where you're comfortable being able to do what you need to do as a leader. And I think that's choosing not just the right staff, but also from a top-down perspective, choosing the right investors as well. And I think that's something that has really helped us to grow the company in the long term.
So what will help is choosing like-minded investors. So you don't have to navigate that very tricky situation of forcing them to see your view.
Yes.
And let's talk about the rapid expansion of Zoom that I know it doesn't just operate here. And so as a startup, deciding between entering new markets and growing current ones, I mean, it's always tempting to kind of venture beyond our shores. And so I wonder if that's a decision you've obviously made that decision, but I wonder if that's something that you constantly think about. And how do you weigh expanding your footprint versus growing what you already have?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I think about at least every day, if not more. And I think for us, we are always going to be a healthcare company at heart. And I think what we need to do is to put patient safety first. That's something we think about. And I think the growth is a close second to that. And I think the decision that we've made as a company is to go deep into a market that we know well, which is Singapore, and to expand upon it. So we had started as a digital health startup, and something that we had pondered on was, do we take this digital asset overseas and expand that, or do we actually grow the ecosystem in a market that we know very well and we were quite sure we had sort of the penetration and reach? And so we actually decided to stay in Singapore, and what we've actually done more recently is to start a fund to acquire clinics. And so what we decided was the best course of action for us to maintain the quality and sort of that patient safety first ethos was to create an ecosystem that's 360 that incorporates wellness, healthcare, and the digital aspects as well.
So in a way, you still managed to expand the business. So it could be seen as a win-win. You managed to get it, because expanding is still happened, right? And it's in telemedicine in vet care, that is so niche, that is so new, because even telemedicine was not really a thing until COVID. So for pets now, that's even more niche and specialized. And so how do you balance the business operations and offerings with industry regulations? Because different, wherever you operate, I mean, it's going to be different standards, different regulations to adhere to. And how do you navigate that, or did you even have to make trade-offs when it comes to regulations?
Yeah. So for us, patient safety is always at the heart of what we're doing and every decision we make about the company. And the good thing is that ethos is very aligned with what regulators are looking for. And so for us, even as a telemedicine provider, we are very careful. We're very risk averse. And we try not to solve issues online that we're not too confident about. And so internally, as a part of our SOPs, we actually have very strict protocols in terms of what can and cannot be done online, similar to human healthcare. Right. And the idea isn't so much that we're trying to solve everything through telemedicine, but rather we're trying to get more pet owners into the healthcare ecosystem, whether it's in the form of advice or triage or even referral. And what we found is that through telemedicine, what has happened is that we've seen referrals and more pet owners go to the clinic when there's an issue earlier on. So they're not waiting around and letting issues escalate.
So it's still it's still primarily a digital business. And do you find that you've had to sacrifice some human engagement with your staff in order to provide that convenience to pet owners? And when we look at the wider pet industry, so we're talking about like the physical vets and pet stores as well. Do you find that there is some impact to the competitiveness in terms of operating in a digital space versus physical, traditional pet service providers?
Yes and no. So the good thing is that we actually started during COVID, and as a team, we're very used to operating in a digital way. So we have all the tools in place to be able to communicate effectively. We have, just the right amount of meetings, I would say, so that we can all stay up to date. But as you mentioned, where it can be a little bit more difficult is getting in touch with stakeholders, because most of the partners we work with, whether it's vet clinics or pet shops, they're all offline. And we have to make sure that we are spending enough time going to different locations and just sort of ensuring that we have the right priorities in place and that we're aligned in what we're doing. So I think it's just spending more time speaking with partners and making sure we have that face time with them.
And as a startup founder, how do you view trade-offs in general? I mean, do you see it as being a compromise or something that actually can benefit the business?
Well, I think inherent to the word, it is about compromise, right? So you have to make sacrifices, but at the same time...
Compromises are not always viewed positively, right?
Yes. I think for a leader, it's actually critical. You have to understand how to make trade-offs because there's only so much time and resources, and especially for a startup, for an SME, we don't have much of that. And so I think not only every year, but I think constantly you have to understand as a leader what your priorities are and what you're trying to build. And so your North Star, your internal compass, your ability to work on instinct is actually really important. And that boils back down to, have you planned well enough? Do you have a solid strategy in place? And as a leader, you just have to spend time and make sure that you're in touch with what you're trying to build.
So you can be in touch with, your North Star, what it is. But people in your company, up and down the line, may not see it, right? And you have investors to answer to. So the million-dollar question is, how do you communicate that to them and make sure that everybody is happy or aligned at least?
it's a learning process, right? And I think sometimes what you realize is that over-communication is actually quite important. So having that transparency, making sure that everyone knows where your headspace is at. So what you're saying may not always make everyone happy, but if you can explain why you're doing certain things, and again, comes back down to that North Star, right? If everyone is very clear on what direction you're trying to go in, it creates less confusion. And at the very least, if people don't agree with you, they can't say that you're not consistent.
All right. So, very wise words, and I think it's pretty useful for other startup founders as well. Hopefully they can take away something from this. Athena, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us at CNA Summit.
Thank you.
That was Athena Lee. She is a CEO and co-founder at ZoomVet. Now it's almost time to head on back into the ballroom for the next part of the summit. That is a panel discussion on external trade-offs. It's going to be moderated by my colleague, CNA presenter Stephen Chia. And this second panel, as I mentioned, looks at external trade-offs. It will examine the strategic trade-offs that leaders must make beyond organizational boundaries. That involves interactions with external stakeholders, for example, as well as environments such as stakeholder expectations, market adaptation, partnerships, and collaborations, even regulatory compliance and brand reputation. So that's happening right now. We're going to take you in there.
Hello, hello. Hi, everyone. It's time for part two. I invite you to just make yourself comfortable. Take a seat, please. It's always hard. The spot after the coffee break is actually extremely difficult because everyone's got in the mood. You know, you're kind of catching up with friends. So thank you all for staying. Sometimes half the room leaves, you know. But today, it's glad to see so many of you here. So welcome back. And for our next panel, as you know, we discussed internal trade-offs earlier. So now we're going to talk about external trade-offs, things that go beyond the organization, outside the walls of the company, because we cannot operate in isolation, and also means there's lots of interactions with our stakeholders, our customers, regulators, you know. And very often, you've got to work with each of them, but they all want something different from you, right? And they all want it at different times on different days, and they're trying to find that sweet spot is really difficult. Well, on my panel today are some of these folks who deal with it all the time. I'm going to pick their brains to see if there is actually a solution to any of this, or what's the best way to work around these circumstances. Let me start inviting them up on stage. We have Mr. Piyush Gupta. He's the CEO for DBS Group. Piyush, please. Mr. Tony So, CEO for NVPC, that's the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center. Mr. Andy Shi, President, APAC at OPPO. Just sit in front of your face, that'll be the right position. And Mr. Stephen Miller, President and Group CEO at ST Telemedia. Once again, I invite you to send in questions. The QR code is on your table. Same deal, scan it, put in the password, and send in your questions. And I'll try and share it with my panelists too. Okay. Gentlemen, welcome. We've got about 40 minutes, and I want to keep this quite fast-paced. So the first question is for all of you, because I want to quick take your opinion on this issue. Are there always trade-offs in leadership? Why must there be? Piyush?
Of course not.
No, there aren't always trade-offs?
I'm pulling it. That's not a silly question. Of course, the trade-offs are...
Unless you live in a different world.
Okay, thanks. That was good.
First of all, internal, we're not talking about that. But you go back to the definition of economics, right? It's an allocation of scarce resources. And the truth is, resources are always scarce, whether it's capital or management bandwidth or time. And then you got to figure how you're going to... So there'll always be trade-offs. But for our panel, I think there are also trade-offs in external circumstances every time, because of what you said. I'm a big believer of where you stand is a function of where you sit. Okay. And so if you're sitting in a role as a regulator, you have a different agenda than if you're an investor or if you're a customer or if you're an employee. And so your view on life will be different. And frankly, even an individual has multiple roles. So when I talk to you in your capacity as a shareholder of DBS, you want different things. And tomorrow I talk to you in your capacity as a customer of DBS, you want different things.
Right.
So there are always trade-offs. So it has to be.
Okay, and I'm sure all of you agree. So the same answer to that first question? Anyone?
Maybe build on Piyush's point. I think leadership is about choices, a strategy, right? If you didn't have to make difficult decisions, then you don't need a CEO. So CEOs do that as a matter of daily decision making. But I think what I want to say is actually when we think about trade-offs, there are things that have to do with time horizon. Correct. Right? If it's a very narrow time horizon, you might be locked into certain options. But once you think about it differently, medium, long term, actually the options expand. If you think about stakeholders, you talk about customers, investor. Again, if you take a broader perspective, again, the range of options could be different. And the third thing I would say is that, if you look at a single metric, profitability, for example, but if you look at impact on broader society, whether the environment, people, society, governance, again, your considerations might be different. So I think when we talk about trade-offs, we need to look at a broader dimension in terms of all these different elements. And unfortunately, if we focus too narrowly, actually restricts your options and makes it a much more difficult A and B choice. Yeah. But can we transcend that into, rather than either or, to and? I think that's going to be the magic of leadership.
And actually, that's what we're going to be talking about. Is all those other areas is really about a balance. It's not just one or the other. Andy, what do you think?
We are paid and trusted to make decisions, so it's always my everyday work. But I don't like to trade-offs. The thing is, when technology companies don't like trade-offs, we invest in innovation so that we can have everything. Do you want everything there?
Can you have everything?
You may. Sometimes when, let's take this phone, for example. Everybody wants the phone to be slim, to be sleek, to be good looking. But when you are making the phone super thin, the world's thinnest, then you don't have so much room for the components, for the hardware. Then what can you do? Either you have to work on the engineering part of it. You just save the space. And also what you can do is just try to do more on the algorithms so that it can have the same features, even though the hardware, you may sacrifice something on the hardware, you can still have the same feature and same experience.
Yeah, but so in a way you can't have everything because you want to have that slimness, but at the same time you got to give up something else, right?
The trade-off will be when you do innovation, you don't have enough money, talent, time to do everything for one generation of the phones. But the unsatisfaction with trade-offs makes you want to innovate more.
Okay. We'll talk about that too. Innovation and satisfaction. Stephen.
I think the other element, and picking up a theme from the previous panel, this is a really challenging time. And if you think what generates trade-offs, it's the change, the change we're dealing with. And we've got really, I think, four major concurrent factors. We've got technology change, Gen AI, climate change, geopolitical change we have in spades, and then demographic change. And these are all are probably at the biggest amount of activity at this point, and everyone's dealing with it simultaneously.
Well, we know change is a constant, and change keeps evolving. You have to adapt, stay flexible. How much of this has to do with managing expectations? Because you deal with your regulators, your shareholders, your customers. If they don't expect the phone to be super slim, then in a way you don't have to really design a very slim phone, right?
Yeah, but in our challenges, It's not really up to the investors. It's more up to the consumers. What the consumers want. If they want, then we will invest, and the investors will understand.
Yeah,
it's fine, Deep. The reason you have trade-offs is people have different expectations. So when you're jumping into, so how do you manage trade-offs? And a lot of times, you have to, I call the word I like is satisfice, which is how do you get a balance between doing enough so everybody is sort of happy? But a lot of that requires managing expectations. And if you can do that, then you can get a reasonable situation. Sometimes you can't. And so sometimes you wind up making some constituencies unhappy. I'm completely with Tony. One answer to this of how do you handle this is think of time frames. In the short term, it's much harder. But if your time frames are extended enough, and you can get different optionality and solutions. But even that requires dealing with expectations. So if you want to deal in longer time frames, then you got to reset the expectations of your stakeholders to accept those longer time frames, right?
Yeah.
And that's also not obvious and easy every time.
And that also depends on what is your ultimate goal. What are you trying to achieve, whether in the short or long term? But is there a sweet spot? Or is there a spot that makes you, I don't know, everyone kind of 70% happy? Or does it not exist?
I think it's situational. I don't think there's any one answer to that. In some situations, you find a sweet spot where everybody can live with the outcome.
Okay, can you give me an example of something?
Well, I can tell you what. So, one of our big challenges, for example, is we believe an obligation to the community at large in Singapore, which means we got to bank the foreign workers, we got to bank the heartlanders, and so on. We know for a fact that costs us at least 1 or 2 percentage points of return on equity because, half our customers are loss-making for us. So that's an obvious trade-off. Do I bank those people because it's good for Singapore and it's good for the image of DBS? Or should I say, forget this, I'll improve my ROE by a couple of percentage points by exiting this customer base? Now, in our decision, we figured that giving up a percentage point or two for the long-term stability and benefit and the positioning of DBS is worth it. There we've hit a sweet spot. Because our investors, who are the ones who are bothered about the ROE, are willing to accept that, we don't have 19%, we have 18%. And that trade-off they're willing to live with. But if it was the gap between 6% and 7%, it's not clear to me they would, because then they would be driving for that extra. So it depends on the context. Sometimes people are happy to live with the trade-off and you get a balance. And other times, people will say not acceptable.
So is it again about how you position that trade-off? Maybe you don't call it a trade-off. It's an alternative. It's almost, and it is managing expectations. So for men, you always say as you get older, after you have kids, you get this dad bod, right? Instead of calling it dad bod, you can call it father figure.
Nice.
Right?
Go with that.
We'll all be happy to deal with that. Yeah, but what do you think, Stephen? I mean, so is it in a way how we phrase it and how we frame it?
I think, again, it's going to be around the consistency of the communication channels. Yeah. And so if you think about, so we're not a listed company, but we've invested and have listed companies. And what we really emphasize is the engagement in the communication process. So, I agree timeframes. And so if you're trying to transition the company, change the strategy of the company, you've got to start early in that. And people have got to be aware what the pluses and minuses of that change is. So, for example, one of our companies, which we no longer hold, Global Crossing, came out of a very challenging set of circumstances. We had basically a strategy around just survival. Then we had growth, and then we had, really harvesting. But, so in terms of dealing with the government regulators and Singapore investor in a major US company was an interesting dynamic. That required a lot of communication. But also, you have to take people with that journey. And so not only investors, but your employees as well. Right. Because those changes will impact them positively and negatively. And some of the early people won't stay around, but you need to attract new talent. So fundamentally, communication and engagement is critical.
Yeah. Tony?
Yeah. I think it's very hard to make everybody very happy all the time. It's impossible. But can we also think in terms of where, different stakeholders, if they all get something, maybe not maximize. If you maximize for one stakeholder, maybe you end up minimizing. And the word I like to use is about optimize. That means collectively, everyone gets some value, some benefit, but not any particular stakeholder gets to maximize. So I get everything and everybody else gets nothing. I think that's going to be very hard to manage. I can share one example from the work that we do at MVPC. We run a digital platform called Giving.sg. That has about 700,000 registered users. We support about 600 charities. So in digital platforms, there's this thing about efficient and seamless journey, right? You want to be able to do your donations and check out very quickly. But what about security? What about identity? Because you talk about AML and those sorts of things. So we have to find a balance. And I think for us is to find using SingPass. SingPass allows you to be able to do some of this work, identify the donor, and yet still, to some extent, have a relatively efficient process. But if you say, I totally want to be anonymous, then okay, you don't get a tax deduction. Mm-hmm. But the problem to the system is that you have lots of anonymous donors. You might expose yourself to AML issues. So I think, again, it's not everyone gets maximum. Right. Neither do you want one person to get maximum, everyone gets zero. But how do you optimize across the entire system? And
in that sense, you were able to ride on another platform. It was almost like a collaboration. SingPass already existed. There was someone else doing it. Yeah. So on that note of collaboration and partnerships, we all work with different organizations, different people. Maybe, Andy, I'll ask you this. I mean, again, when you work with someone, is there always a trade-off? Must you give up something in order to get something else?
Yes, we do, because we have so many markets, and different people have very, very different needs. It varies so much from the relatively poor neighborhood in Indonesia comparing to the premium market here locally in Singapore. Their needs are so much different. So what we do is that we give them different devices, different product series from our low-end A series, but to the high-end flagship models. They are designed to meet different needs of different consumers. But the trade-off is that we have to maybe let's take the flagship, for example. We can only design it around one certain group of people. Mm. Currently we are designing it around the Chinese and the Singaporean, but we are not doing a lot of research in the US or the European markets. But later on, we may need to do the trade-offs. But currently, when we are designing products mainly across Asia Pacific, that's it's easier. But even in that case, it's not really looking into the needs of the people in Thailand, Vietnam, markets like those. Okay. So this is the trade-off between different markets, different priorities.
Just pick out a little bit. I find it interesting that you've decided to target Singapore because we're such a small population. Why does that make sense? What is the trade-off you've had to...
The premium market, it is the largest in Southeast Asia. Yeah. It's the biggest premium market.
We're premium. There you go. Okay, so for that, but in that respect, you're giving up on the volume in return for a more premium product and a more premium price, I guess.
Actually, I find it very interesting that in Southeast Asian markets, every market is so important. The GPT per capita, Singapore is the highest, but it's the smallest in size. Okay. But GPT per capita, the lowest is Indonesia and the Philippines, but they are huge in terms of size. So every market is important. So every certain group of audience is important. But so we build very different devices to meet their needs. For example, AI is a very hot topic, and last year that OPPO was the first brand in Southeast Asia to introduce generative AI across all our product lines, not just meeting the needs of the high-end users in Singapore, but also providing services and also maybe just fun photo enhancements for those in Indonesia and in the Philippines, because everybody deserves this.
And everybody likes technology. Yeah. So let me pick up on AI for a bit, because technology is something we all need to adapt. And I know at DBS you've often said you're not just a bank, you're almost a fintech to a certain extent, right? So when you adopt certain technology, sometimes you take a risk because you're not quite sure of the outcome. So how do you look at that? I mean, and what kind of trade-off do you have in mind when you're saying, let's try this?
So first of all, just sticking to AI, I think the trade-offs are profound. They're not straightforward. The optimistic part of me, utopian part of me, thinks that AI is going to be a game changer for the positive, and we are seeing benefits. The dystopian part of me says this is going to destroy civilization and mankind as we know it, right? And so, what do you do? I'm reminded sometimes when I was in my old Citi days, we had a chairman called Chuck Prince, and he got pilloried. Yeah. But he once famously said, when the music is on, you have to get on the dance floor. And that's true for most people
what song is playing.
In our positions. But what happens is that there's an expectation from the shareholder community, investors. If I sat back and said, the music is on for AI, but DBS is opting out because I'm worried about the dystopian future of AI, so we're not going to do it, I won't last 2 quarters, right? And so it's not a viable option. But at the same time, you go into it and recognize that there's some serious challenges, not just challenges of security. The challenge is the philosophy. What makes us human beings? What do you want to be able to do for people and not do? So you've got to really think of profound consequences. And sometimes you make bets, you experiment, you sandbox, you do small-scale stuff. But finally, you don't know what the final outcomes are likely to be. But, you try to do it in a balanced way. So you're not betting the farm. But at the same time, you have a credible position that you can leverage if things go a particular way.
I'm almost thinking if I can ask AI about using AI, right? Because now you use DeepSeek or something and punch it in, should I adopt this new technology for my business, which does da-da-da-da-da, and you get an answer. Tony, Stephen, what do you guys think? Tony?
I think AI is something you can't wish away. It's going to come very fast. For me, I think in terms of trade-offs is, do you go fast, go big, or do you find ways to learn such a way that you don't bet the farm? In our small ways, we are still looking into that. We are not a for-profit organization, so it's a bit different in our context. But it's clear that we have to even look at it in terms of internal work processes and also how we better serve our customers. So we have to learn. We have to try. We have to learn. Make small experiments that allow us to understand what this is about. And the trade-off is like, I wish you could move faster, but I think this is a kind of a risk-balanced approach to adopting technology that makes sense and to be ready when the thing takes off, you are ready to ride that wave.
So, Steve, let me give you, at the heart of most AI is data. So an important underlying question is what are the trade-offs in respect of data and data privacy? Right? So should you use the data or should you not use the data? And it's sometimes easy to say, we have a principle in DBS called pure. Data must be purposeful, unsurprising, respectful, explainable, etc. But in reality, the whole idea of what is appropriate use of data is not finite. It's not fixed. It changes over time. So you think about the notion of private data, or what's private. In 2,000 years ago in the Roman baths, men and women bathed together. So gender, this thing was not an issue. It evolved by Victorian England that, hey, this is not a good thing. Or when the Post and Telegraph in the US got formed, it was okay for the postman to open the letter and read it. It evolved over time that this is not a good thing. And even today, if you think about data, the cultural context of East and West is very different. Liberal Western thought is my data is private. In Eastern societies, general use of data is okay. It's an intergenerational thing. Elder people think differently about use of data than younger people. And frankly, even you as a person, everybody here, if I ask you, are you happy to give me your data or for somebody to know all the time where you are? Everybody says no. Yeah. Then I say, show me your mobile phone. Everybody has got location on for every app. Why? Because the trade-off is worthwhile. You want to use Google Maps. You want to use Waze, so you leave location on. So even you actually make trade-offs which change all the time. If I give you, give me a mobile number, you'll say no. And if I say 40% off in your next golf set, you'll give me a mobile number. So the point is all of these things change in context. And I want to go back to my first point, that you cannot generalize because nothing is absolute. These are all contextual decisions. Right. And the problem with external trade-offs is you always have to be very thoughtful about the context in which you're making a decision because the context evolves.
Yeah, the environment affects that, but it's also how you phrase that question. You didn't just say, can I have your number and invade your privacy? Or versus, do you want to take part in a lucky draw and win a car, Stephen?
Yeah, look, I think the bits that is missing around use of AI, Gen AI, is actually the people factor, right? So within organizations, you can turn on ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever else, but actually, does your team, A, know how to use it, and B, do they respect, the guideline principles that you have in place? In my company, a lot of people were trying it out, and we sort of said stop for 2 months because we've got to put guidelines and parameters in place. I think the other thing, anecdotally, which is a people issue, is boards are nervous. If they don't understand, so DBS well entrenched down the digital path, fantastic, they can go forward. A lot of companies, boards, are nervous around the risk factors, and they're trying to educate themselves around what does this mean. And there's the classic case of the fraudulent, legal precedent, these sorts of things. Hallucinations exist, biases exist. So I think that as we talk about technology, it's not the technology, it's the people using the technology and the boards being comfortable with the technology that needs to go quickly. Then the adaptation and usage will follow.
But when you do that, again, at what expense? And how do you sort of get everyone up to speed to be on the same page? Because that's almost impossible. There will always be different tiers, different levels, and different people have different thinking about the technology, right?
But if you don't bring your people with you, then you'll get the inverse reaction, where people will put in false information or concoct outcomes that don't actually work or make sense. People, so users in certain industries are terribly nervous about job replacement. So if you don't want, if you're in an industry that actually should be using AI, how do you reassure, how do you bring your people with you in that use? Otherwise, that trade-off is, A, your staff will sabotage it or could sabotage it, or they'll leave. They'll find something else. Yeah. So, a lot of the technology is, yes, the technology, but it's the ways of working and how do you bring the organization with it. We were talking at one of my companies, if you're the leader and you've got a flag and you're going to charge the AI hill, you want your staff to come with you, not stand at the bottom of the hill and go, gee, that's a large hill. So, so that's the trade-off in the leadership that's got to go with it. Could you roll it out really quickly? Absolutely. Technology is not the issue on AI.
Okay. So it's the people and the leadership, and leadership needs to show the way.
Correct. Yeah, 100%.
Which means also taking that risk where you have evaluated the situation, decided we will try this new project in technology, accepting that certain risks come with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Andy, what do you think? I mean, you guys are technology in itself. Yeah. Do you feel that all your staff need to be of that same mindset that I'm willing to try to take risks to push the boundaries?
Yes, definitely. For technology companies, we always need to be bold in everything. But the thing is that I think technology companies are like gaining more than ever the public power over the society, because we know the algorithms and we do everything how we understand society organizes. But do the engineers necessarily understand that? And do the government, the regulators necessarily keep up with the latest technology development? The only thing that we should do is that both parties should work together. Otherwise, AI will be just like a beast without a cage. But here, to protect our corporation as well, we need more regulations here. We can't just do everything based on how our values are and how we want to do it, but on how it should be. Like the society should have a common ground, like more regulations on technologies. Otherwise, technology is developing so fast without noticing. It could be going anywhere. Then how to protect the data privacy for everybody? That will maybe hurt everyday people, and some companies may do evil things on everyday people and make profit from that.
So regulation is key in that area. Yeah.
Yes.
I want to touch on that a bit more, but just a reminder: if you have questions, I'm going to come to it real soon. Just jump on the QR code, send in your questions, and I can bring it to the panel.
Stephen, let me just add to. So by and large, my bias is also Stephen's. You want to take everybody on the journey and get everybody engaged, but even in that, there's a trade-off. So if you go and ask the regulator, They will say, you know what, your line 2 of defense, your risk functions, compliance functions, we don't want them to be thinking about constantly innovating. We want them to safeguard. And your line 3, which is the audit, we certainly want them to have a different role. So in our construct, we create performance cells and put people together. The big trade-off is, do we put line 2 and line 3 in there at the front of innovation, or we don't let them be there because we want them to be independent? And that's a trade-off as well.
Yes. Is that because of regulation that you do it that way? Does regulation sometimes shape the way you make decisions on the trade-offs?
Of course. Regulations, when you go back and say you want to optimize, and by and large, that's my general view, how do you optimize? But there's some places where this is a regulatory no-no. So it's not a question I'm going to optimize on regulation. You're just not, you can't do some things because the law doesn't let you do something. And so oftentimes the regulation shape, we launched a digital exchange, right? So we're one of the few regulated entities. We can tokenize, we trade Bitcoin, we custodize Bitcoin, et cetera, et cetera. And, we wanted to launch it at scale. It wasn't in regulation. The regulator was very uncomfortable with DBS as a public bank taking it into the retail market. So now you're set with a trade-off. I could easily, everybody goes to Gemini and they're going to Coinbase and CoinHako, but the regulator says, okay, let them go there, don't come to DBS. I have the capability. So, I could say, forget it, I'm going to do it. And then tomorrow I'm going to run into all kinds of challenges. I'd be dumb to try and do it, right? So you make those trade-offs.
Stephen, you want to add?
Yeah, no, I think regulation is something that is always in the back of the mind. So probably the next most regulated industry after banking is telecoms. And so, dealing with things like, scams and things like that, you have to be conscious of it. So, the cost of regulation is not insignificant, but it's also, that's the operating parameter that you have to operate in. And regulation is there for public good and for public service. So we're respectful of the regulation. The cost of regulation we might want to manage around a little bit. But, it is a trade-off, but it's a necessary trade-off.
I'm just going to take some questions that you guys have sent in. This one's for you, Piyush. It says, can you share a time in DBS when you had to make an extremely difficult external trade-off? What was your thought process for prioritizing, and was the sacrifice worth it?
Well, this is a good example. When I decided not to do crypto with the retail base in Singapore and make it a club only for accredited investors. So, we obviously, the biggest volumes in crypto are in the mass market. So we decided to give up on that because we figured that the market is probably not right and our regulator wasn't very happy with it. The trade-off is you give up a lot of economics and you give up a lot of momentum when you do that, but it was an appropriate decision, if you ask me. Another trade-off, we took a mobile-only bank into India. We launched the digital bank in India. And you realize with the mobile-only thing offerings, they're fantastic for customer acquisition, right? And you get millions of young customers. But if you actually take a cash flow view to it, none of them make you money. So you're sitting here trying to figure, should I go with this and get these huge millions of customers, hoping that 10 years from now they'll be profitable? Or do you worry about the short term and say, hey, this makes no sense? And so how do you make the trade-off? So we wound up eventually pivoting and said we won't be just digital, but we'll add a physical overlay into a branch system, and we went and acquired a bank. So you wind up with sometimes pulling the plug. I did that. We tried to acquire a bank. Sometimes you wind up pivoting. And then sometimes you say, given all things, you just charge ahead. We've done all three depending on the situation.
Actually, I'll put that question to all of you too. You want to go first? Tony, maybe you can share. Has there been a situation where you've had to make quite a large external trade-off, rather? What kind of sacrifice you made and the results from that?
Yeah, well, we don't have a lot of customer-facing kind of B2C businesses, but we do, again, I talked about the digital platform. A couple of years ago, we had to make a decision. It's a stable system. We bootstrapped it. It was an end-of-life content management system. We could have kept it, but it was not flexible. It was not very secure, and it was extremely, too simple. We then said, okay, if we are going to move this, there will be relearning from the charities, relearning from the users. There's going to be a cost. But do we bite the bullet, take the decision to just move forward? Implementation happened in November 2023. The initial few months were difficult. There were teething problems. But I think in terms of just recognizing that we had to move, the trade-off of accepting the short-term pain so that we can move forward. Today we have a much more stable system. We have a lot more flexibility because now it allows us to respond more nimbly to customer needs and to emerging technology trends. But really, I think that was one call that we had to make and say, you know what, we could have kept something that was really nice and stable and happy, everyone's okay, and move something to be ready for the future. And sometimes that's the decision we make so that we can really bite the bullet in the short term but gain the benefits in the long term.
And you're not entirely sure for 100% that it will turn out
exactly,
right.
Yeah. You just have to make that bet, yeah.
This really reminds me of something that happened last year in Indonesia and also in the Philippines, that we discovered that we interviewed lots of consumers, like real-life consumers, that we discovered that in the informal housing areas in Indonesia, around Jakarta, and also in offshore working environments, the connection, the signals are like relatively poor. And these people living in the suburbs or in these housing conditions, they have like definitely their needs are not satisfied with the connections. But what we decided to do is that we invested in our self-innovated AI link boosts, that we apply AI technologies working with the local carriers to test all the signals to make sure that the connection is strengthened. Is it like for everybody? No. Is it like helping everybody in their daily lives? No. It's just for particular social groups. But this will definitely increase our budget, cost. But we still decided to do this because we believe we are making products for our consumers, not just for my KPI. It's definitely going to make it worse for me just to reaching my KPIs for that year, for that particular year. But that in the long term is good for the brand and good for the society. And these communities will grow with us so that we want people like this from all walks of life can enjoy the enjoyment of technology.
So you're evaluating the outcome from that and the possible returns, which may not be tangible.
Yes.
Stephen, you want to take a crack too?
Yeah, in ST Telemedia's history, when we've invested in Singapore and regionally as well, sometimes multi-regionally, we usually do it with partners. We find that works well for the local environment, risk sharing on capital, risk sharing on customers and whatever else. But they usually start off really well. You invest a lot of time and effort. And for a period of time, it works fantastically. And so 9 times out of 10. But invariably over time, views differ, circumstances change, people don't want to keep putting in capital. And so you then, in a very awkward situation of that JV doesn't work anymore. The business may be sound, but the relationship is challenged. And so do you buy them out? Do you sell the whole business? These are very fundamental questions, and usually the people we partner with are very prominent in those countries, so it's not necessarily an easy conversation. And I think that a lot of effort. If you talk about trying to find common ground or optimal grounds, after you've spent a fair bit of time, you'll know whether the situation is reconcilable or not. Right. And if the conclusion is not, then you have to go into the second mode of resolution and reaching an outcome that may not be optimal but is acceptable to all sides.
And that also depends on the kind of relationship you have with the other party,
Fundamental.
Yeah. I mean, it just reminds us, again, when in life we're always making choices and there are trade-offs. Just like, when I had my first girlfriend and I broke up with her, and now I went out with my second girlfriend. I gave up the first one, right? I mean, she was hot, but now the second one's even better. She's my wife.
She broke up with you. Correct.
She broke up.
Who made the choice? You or her?
Exactly. Okay, the truth now, Steve.
Let me give you another example.
Can you handle the truth?
A different external stakeholder group, When we are digitizing, one of our big challenges is between employees as a stakeholder group and customers and shareholders. And it was quite clear to us that because of digitizing, about 1,600 people would lose jobs. Yeah. So then the question is, do you go ahead or not? And now this goes back to how do you deal with these trade-offs to get optimal outcomes? We figured we didn't have a choice. The customers expected it. The world was moving on. But we started dealing with the unions and the employees very early. So you got to build trust. You got to, like I said, package this correctly. You got to explain to them what you'll do for them. We built transition pathways for them to move from one job to another job. So if you can do that, you can actually square the trade-offs. It's not always possible, but sometimes it is. And a lot of it is in trying to win trust and communicate well.
So you're reframing the issue at hand in a way. It's not just, I got to lose jobs, but how can I take those jobs, put them somewhere else, doing something else? I think
it recognizes the employees as a legitimate stakeholder.
And
then to say, what do we do right for them? Even if the business requires us to move in this direction, what can I do to ease the pain of this particular situation? And it's that notion that, as companies, sometimes we don't just operate on the basis of just meeting regulation. There are things we do because it is good for society, it's good for communities, it's good for our different stakeholders. Of course, we have to balance it, we have to optimize. But if the business decision has to be, we have to let some of these staff go, what is the best way we can do so that we still take care of the stakeholders that have worked very hard and contributed to the company in the past?
Okay.
And that's, I think, is the whole idea of managing stakeholders versus just say, if I were just looking after the shareholder, then why would I care about your staff? Yeah. So that's the balance I think we talk about.
So it sounds like it's not just a hard and fast, kind of rule. So much of it dependent on the soft skills that you need to bring to the table. We just got about 5 minutes left, but I want to go into the area of CSR, philanthropy, social responsibility, because many organizations today all take an effort to be doing that, and all your organizations do that. Must there be a trade-off in that? When you do good, must it come at an expense where profitability, whatever,
So I don't think it must be, and there are two prisms by which it is not. One is, if you can build that philanthropic agenda into your core business strategies, then it's actually quite helpful. So for example, I said we deal with heart lenders, we deal with foreign migrant workers, and we subsidize our offerings to them. But with today's technology, you can actually work hard to reduce cost and make it a profitable business. So sometimes you get alignment and you don't necessarily have conflict. So you could actually take some of that and build it in. Other times, it is also possible to do it if you change the time frame, like Tony said. So to me, we do a lot of CSR and charity, etc. It goes from the P&L in the short term, but you got to figure how does it help you in the long term. And for me, the minute you change the time frame to be long term, then the single biggest thing you have to remember is that you exist as an entity because society gives you a right to exist. And if society is not willing to give you a right to exist in the long term, you won't survive. 100%. So how do you earn that license from society in the long term? And the minute you think long-term, therefore, your long-term sustainability depends on the social license. In which case, it's not a P&L expense. It's an investment in future income streams. Then you align it. And so
I think there's I agree. I think there's two other elements where it pays off. First of all is your employees. The younger generations almost treat this as mandatory that you have a CSR program. If you are not credible in that space, they kind of hold that against management. The second one is, got to remember, is part of the people you're helping, and certainly in our cases, are your customers. So I have StarHub customers, Piyush has DBS customers. That is recognised in the community as well. That we are profitable from them, but we're contributing back to those pieces. So I think there's more than one lens on the CSR program. I think the other one is ESG, in my space, data centers. And, Piyush's point is, the social license to operate. So we're committed very, very much to going green on our data centers because I figure if, given the demand and uptake in those businesses, if we do not go green, society will let us know. So it's not if you want to do it, we have to do it.
Yeah, but are you doing it because you feel that the younger generation ask of it? What if it was 20 years ago, when it wasn't a big deal to be sustainable? Would you still do it?
I do think, from my point of view, absolutely. And I think Singapore is small and mighty, but I think this is the advantage of Singapore in this sense is you get social cohesion and social alignment of what are important principles. And I think that's something, and include governance on top of that. And I think that actually puts Singapore, not just Temasek companies, but Singapore corporates generally, I think, a step ahead of a number of other countries.
Okay, Tony, I got to hear from you.
I think CSR is incredibly important. I think Stephen
Why would
said
you
it
say
very
that?
well. Huh? Why would I say that, right? Yeah. Anything else?
A bit biased in the organization you're
Yes, right. Also, how do you even go beyond CSR? Because I think the notion that, and a lot of companies here do a lot of wonderful work, but we do have the notion that some companies do it as a little donation on the side and a little bit of a 1 half-day volunteering, and that's done for the year. Check the box, put in an annual report, and they're done. I think the opportunity for us is really to reimagine the role of companies in society, such that it's profit with purpose. And really this notion of ESG or sustainability and all that, I think the point about young people asking about CSR is interesting because there's even a Big Four consultant study in Singapore that shows that more than 80-90% of the Gen Zs and millennials want purpose in their work.
Correct.
They expect to find purpose as part of their job satisfaction. Yep. And it's also part of how they select companies to work for and what gives them the sense of engagement, the sense of commitment. Of course, you think about brand reputation, you think about your relationship with your customers, your investors and all that. So for us, the work that we've been doing is to encourage companies to go beyond corporate giving, beyond CSR, and say, how do you think about profit with purpose that includes the environment, people, society, governance, and economic? Sure. Because that will actually transform the business. And I'll just make one final point. There was an interesting study, this was a few years ago, and one of the advisors did this study where they took the total shareholder return of the Fortune most admired companies and the Forbes Just 100. They took the median TSR and they compared with the S&P median TSR. And the premium was 40%. Meaning the most admired and Just 100 had a far superior total shareholder return to the S&P 500 median TSR. So actually there is a financial payoff. So the interesting paradox is that if you don't pursue profit alone, you pursue purpose, and you talk about your environment, the people, the society and governance, that actually comes back in terms of superior returns. So I don't know if that's your experience, but that was an interesting study for me in terms of...
I've looked at these. I think they all show correlation but not causality.
True.
So I could argue that the companies which are profitable have more capacity to do purpose. So it doesn't necessarily follow that purpose leads to profit.
That's true. That's possible.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point.
But what about DABS? What is your perspective on this?
So our perspective, this is, we build in purpose for the long term. We 5-6 years ago, we launched this whole sustainability agenda, mostly around the S of sustainability, not even E. Because I'm convinced that in the coming decade, the biggest challenge for companies will be this question of what does society expect of you? I think when you become a company, you don't just, as a legal entity, you don't just get some rights, you get responsibilities. And sooner or later, if you're not fulfilling those responsibilities and being seen as a good citizen, society will turn on you. Mm-hmm. Especially when, we make $11 billion. I can tell you it's not far from people saying, my God, you make $11 billion, what are you doing for us? And so to be thoughtful about the long-term possibilities of a company like ours, you don't have a choice. You have to embrace a social conscience. And it's a very practical business thing, apart from whether it's the right thing to do or not. Just for the long-term sustainability of the company, you'd better be thinking about it.
So just do it anyway. That way you can feel good and also do good, right? That's what you're saying. and it will come back to you in a way.
But the studies have shown that the millennial Gen Zs actually are very purpose-driven. They are aware.
Absolutely.
You talk about maybe wokeism. Wokeism is not a good term.
Not we got to wrap up, but I want to ask you this question, and something I see, because wokeism, we are hyper-woked in this day and age. Many of them are like, oh, how can you do this? It's, So how do you deal with that as well in terms of in your organizations, this hyper-wokeness? And again, does it come at a certain expense where you cannot do certain things, you cannot push certain boundaries because it would be seen as not good?
My view is you shouldn't be hyper anything. The minute you're hyper, you leave yourself open to having to retract. What is happening in the US is a consequence of that. People got so hyper that there's a reaction and now people are walking out. You have no credibility. Okay. 3 months ago you said this is the best thing since sliced bread. 3 months later you say, oh, we don't believe in DEI, we don't believe in this thing. How do you live with yourself? But that comes from taking extreme positions. But if you don't take extreme positions, if you take pragmatic positions, then you don't have to keep, blowing with the wind.
Tony?
I think anything that's extreme is unhelpful. So in the point about wokeism is that certain groups say you must do it my way, and my way is the only way. But it loses the point about different stakeholders and finding that balance that all the different stakeholders can agree to. There may be certain social injustices, problems that have to be resolved. I'm sure there are more constructive ways to have conversations to engender progress rather than shouting at each other and say you're doing it wrong and I'm going to boycott you. I think that's not helpful. So I think in the organization and in Singapore as well, it's always about constructive dialogue and progress rather than grandstanding and making extreme statements.
Andy?
At OPPO, we have the core value of our corporate culture is 本分 in Chinese, which means basic responsibilities, or like honesty, but beyond honesty. It's like if you need to do something that is like right. If it's supposed to be like this, then it has to be like this. It's not like even if something is not like written in contracts, but you feel it's your responsibility, you still need to take it. So for this like kind of issue, it's not like about the outside pressures coming to you. It could be overwhelming, but internally we have lots of dialogues in the company that what is right, what is wrong, and what we should do, and we just forget about the outside pressures. We just do what we feel right to do.
Stephen.
I think from a governance point of view, if a company understands its purpose, its values, and its role in society, then whether you're woke or whether you're far right or whatever it is, you can not ignore, but you can manage through and manage around. So I think once a company, an entity understands those core values, the governance from the board down to the management, then you can deal with the noise on the side. Don't pay attention to that and stay true to your path.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking my panel here. Piyush, Tony, Andy, Stephen, thank you so much, gentlemen, for sharing your insights. Just sit tight for a second. We're just going to wrap things up. I mean, you've heard from both panels. There's a lot to digest, but basically, effective leadership, starting and leading the way in the right spirit is where it begins. And I think we've got some ideas now. So hopefully when you each go back to your different organizations, that will be a part of it as well. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of the summit. We thank you all so much for coming. I just need to mention our partners, presenting partner Singlife, impact partner NVPC, main partner OPPO. And thank you all for joining us here at CNA Summit 2025. And I look forward to seeing you all again. Well, soon.
And we've come to the end of this edition of the CNA Summit, Trade-offs in Leadership, and hope you had an insightful afternoon. If you missed some of the segments or would like to revisit the best bits from today, do tune in to CNA on the 3rd and 4th of March, 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. It's also available on cna.asia/YouTube Live. And once again, I'm Elizabeth Neo. Thank you so much for joining us and have a great evening. I'll see you again next year.